I walked in, didn't recognize the place. Walked in here, and I'm sat down and looked across the way, and I'm like, where's Corbin? I forgot. Eddie Garrison, back in the mix. You guys, Eddie and Jimmy are both back in today, so we're back to getting the band back together. And you guys yesterday, as I had mentioned, and I thought it was cool, decided that you wanted to go ahead and do a little festive cheer together, did a little road trip down to Buc-ee's, do some shopping. Everything go okay? Eddie, drive go okay?
No, it didn't, Jake.
Why
It
not?
did not. You see, Jimmy has one of those cars where, it doesn't take gas and the battery died.
Oh, boy.
He forgot to charge it up before we left.
We had to push it into Buc-ee's. Thankfully, they had some electric chargers there, but it was a rough go. The
was a
Buc-ee's
very nice
carolers made it okay,
The
though.
good news is,
Yeah,
though,
very nice
if you
workout.
needed to take a nap while the car was charging, you could have gone into the Buc-ee's restroom and just turned one of them in your own private condo because they do have that going for them, which is nice,
They
right?
actually add cots for the holiday season, believe it or
I
not.
like that.
You know what's weird is that when we got there was a Jake Query section. I was like, wow.
Of course.
He
The
had his
honorary,
own
right?
reserved bathroom.
Do you know
Nice.
what? I will say this, and this is to let you know what sort of a high-class lifestyle that I lead. So we did the Christmas tree the other day, and I think I told you guys, Shannon and I, like our tradition is we get, each place we travel, we get a Christmas ornament. So it's kind of fun to hang the ornament. We're like, oh, remember this one from whatever. And Shannon actually said, we didn't get one at Buc-ee's. So apparently she wants a Buc-ee's Christmas ornament. You guys didn't happen to pick. I should have had you pick me one up.
In hindsight, if you let us know, we could have made that
I
happen.
know. But I apologize. But welcome back on a Tuesday. This is Query and Company here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. You just heard the voices of Eddie Garrison, Jimmy Cook. My name is Jake Query. A lot to talk about, including, yesterday we talked so much about Indiana, Notre Dame, and just college football in general that I think now we do kind of segue back into, because it's that weird week for the Pacers where the NBA schedule is very light. I know that Rick Carlisle was on with the wake-up call this morning with KB and Andy and, had some pretty interesting perspectives on just what's going wrong with the Pacers, and we'll get into that a little bit. But I do feel like the focus kind of goes back towards the Colts in general, because this is a big one. Going into Denver, the reality is it is essentially, and at the beginning of the year, let's go back to August. Back in August, I kept saying that this year was all about the development of Anthony Richardson, and that this year was about making sure that they were taking every step towards building towards a franchise quarterback, and that the wins and losses on the year were almost secondary to simply developing their young quarterback. And then you had the situation going into the Minnesota game where he's benched, and it felt like and seemed like the Colts were saying, that's it. The experiment, we're moving on from it. Obviously, that was not the case, and perhaps that was all just part of this process. Years from now, we'll find out what really took place behind closed doors between Flacco and the decision to go there and then get away from Flacco and go back to Anthony Richardson. But Richardson is starting to show more completion to his game. Doesn't mean that he is a completed product or anywhere near it. But I still go back to, I feel like this year is about his development above and beyond anything else. And anything that comes with that or as a result of that is gravy. Now, with that said, the last time that we went through this process was Andrew Luck in terms of a franchise quarterback. And with Andrew Luck, what happened was that first year you could say it's all about the development of their franchise quarterback and handing the keys from Peyton Manning over to Luck and going into a new era. And Luck had success right away and was good right away and had a game-winning drive in Detroit where, he arrived and, they made the playoffs and the Bruce Arians year and all of that magic. And as I talked about it at the time at the beginning of this year, I think in retrospect, where the Colts erred, and I actually put this a lot on the owner, not even Ryan Grigson, but more so the owner, is I think that because they had early success with Andrew Luck, they accelerated the timeline, and they inorganically pushed all their chips in to the point where they were like, no, we're ready to win now. And in doing that, while Andrew Luck may have been ready, some of the other pieces around him were not. And they started adding in pieces that just didn't match. Andre Johnson and going out and getting, spending a ton of money on LaRon Landry and Geister Sherrills was okay for a while there, but Eric Walden and Ricky Jean Francois, and they pushed all in, and instead of allowing pieces around Luck to develop organically, when those pieces didn't hit, then after 2 or 3 years, you're right back to square one again, and you've got all these other pieces that you were hoping that veterans were going to be able to push you over the finish line, and instead they were like you guys going to Buc-ee's. They ran out of battery. So with this particular season, when you look at what Anthony Richardson has done, it would be outstanding if the Colts are able to win in Denver and they can put themselves in position to go into the playoffs. But you would just hope that in doing that, it doesn't accelerate their timeline and that they stay true to the pace and the growth, not only in Richardson, but the players around him, and they don't push in too early of thinking that it means they're right on the cusp of Super Bowl contention, because they're not. If the Colts get into the playoffs this year, while it would be great and while it's important for Richardson's development to go through that process, the reality is they're probably going to get in the playoffs and lose to Pittsburgh or Kansas City or Buffalo or, whoever they face. They may win a game, but I don't think anybody's anticipating they would make a deep run. All of that to be said, Jimmy, it is a big one against Denver, and if they don't win, the silver lining is they're at least still getting him used to playing in big-time environments, in big-time stakes, and doing so in December versus September.
That's always a point that, rightfully so, I'm not critiquing it, but that's a point that you are always worried about, whether it's the Pacers or the Colts, in that you don't want to accelerate the timeline, turn into all chips in quote that we love so much, and then you wind up putting the cart before the horse well too quickly, and you're behind the eight ball in that regard, trying to navigate expectations and reset where things should be, whether it's the Colts or whether it's the Pacers. And you highlighted it during the Andrew Luck era, how that was the thing, and you don't want that to be something that appears again for this Anthony Richardson window that, if you're a Colts fan, you think is very vast, because you hope that he's going to be your franchise quarterback and continue to grow and develop into that. For me, why I want them to take this game in Denver isn't just because it creates a runway for them to sneak into the playoffs. I want these final 3 games to really matter. By that I mean they're still going to matter because it's Anthony Richardson's development, but you have a potential for the Colts for all of these last 4 games to be playoff games, because you're playing to keep your playoff hopes alive. You beat Denver. It is not a big ask to ask Denver to lose to the Chargers or to lose to Kansas City. I know they have one more tough matchup there as well, and the other matchup is a cupcake. I don't have the schedule in front of me.
Cincinnati.
But there you go. So the primary threats you would think are Kansas City and the Chargers. That Chiefs game towards the end of the year, maybe that's a scenario where Kansas City's resting starters, and you can't bank on Denver stumbling. But that Chargers matchup next week, after this matchup against the Colts, maybe Denver drops 2 in a row and you're in the driver's seat. And now every one of these games, you're not just hyper-focused on Anthony Richardson's development, you're hyper-focused at him having a significant seat at the table for games that matter. If they lose to Denver on Sunday, it's not to say the final 3 games don't matter, because Jake, you and I have been on that same camp of his development is paramount to anything else this season. But if you lose on Sunday, it takes some of the significance off of what these reps are. They're still valuable NFL reps, but it's not creating this opportunity that doesn't come around very often, which is you need to win out to get in, and you need a little bit of help along the way. So still having that aspect of it makes this game all the more critical for me, because I want these next 3 weeks to be relevant to their playoff hopes.
Right, that's fair. And here's the other thing that's funny. And I know that I'm a big, probably more so than I should be. I always play the game of, can you imagine if you went back 6 months ago, when looking at where we are and things. But whoever would have guessed, if you were to look at the Colts schedule, and if I said to you, Jimmy, let's go back in August, okay? So you're sitting here in August, and you're looking at the Colts schedule over the course of the year, and somebody comes to you and they say, I'm from the future. I'm from the future, and I know for a fact that in early December, you and Eddie are going to take a road trip. And you'd say, okay, that seems a little bit far-fetched, but I like Eddie, but okay, why? And they say, well, because you both are going to go down to the Buc-ee's in Bowling Green just because you want to go down and pick up some beaver nuggets and other stocking stuff.
It's a classic guys trip.
And right there,
Timeless
you're
right
like,
there.
okay,
Yeah.
that's plausible, right? And then they say, and when you come back, you're going to be talking about how the Colts are in a critical game, and they're doing it going in against a team that it's a critical game because realistically, there's a playoff spot on the line, and the Colts and one other team are vying for that playoff spot. If you at that point were to look at their schedule, you would go, well, I know the Colts finished with Tennessee and Jacksonville in the mix, and they even go to New England late. Those are AFC teams. In Denver. Denver is not the team that you probably would have guessed, right? Didn't we kind of think that Denver was even maybe behind where the Colts were on their rebuild process and timeline?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've always admired Denver's defense, but I don't think anybody, even the most devout Bo Nix followers, would have thought he would have the rookie season that he's been having. Like that's part of the reason they're in the situation they are, is Sean Payton has been able to unlock something in him, and he's looked like not just a serviceable starter, but a starter you can build around. I think that would have caught a lot of us by surprise. We would go back in a time machine and say that's why, because you could believe it because Denver's always had good defenses and they're a strong group in that regard. But the idea of it being because of the quarterback, that would have taken me by surprise.
Have you been to Denver?
I've not.
I have. Love it. Love Denver.
No surprise there. Eddie, how many times have you been to Denver?
Just once.
How long were you there?
Oh, boy. I think a week.
How recently? A week?
Maybe. Olivia's dad lives out there now, so we visited.
Did you drive or fly?
Flew.
Okay. And then did you find it to be like
high.
with the altitude? What's that?
We got high.
Yeah, Rocky Mountain High, right?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Altitude, yes, did mess with me a little bit.
Okay, and that's the other thing that I'm fascinated by. I've always wondered this. John Elway was the original fourth quarter comeback guy. I mean, John Elway, when he played for the Denver Broncos, the big calling card of John Elway was that he had like more fourth quarter comebacks than anybody else, and he was Mr. Clutch in the fourth. And John Elway, to me, may actually, I think as time goes on, the more I think about it, the more I think he might actually have been the most naturally gifted quarterback of all time, honestly. But I've always wondered how many of his fourth quarter wins, and this is something I say this because I wonder how the Colts are going to prepare for this. We talked about it with Chappell yesterday. The altitude is a real thing there. I mean, it really does. I remember the first time that I went to Denver, I was a freshman in college, and I went with a bunch of guys, and we road tripped out there because one of the guys in our, that I was running with in college was from Denver. So we went out to his house for the weekend. And they knew that I was an aspiring broadcaster and that I'd done play-by-play in high school. And so we were playing like backyard football. And they were like, Query, give some play-by-play. And it was hard for me to do it because I was getting winded because we'd just gotten there like the day before and I had not acclimated. And now that sounds crazy, but it really does. It
does sound slightly odd.
I know. And I'll give you another example. I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, I flew to Denver, and we were going out for something. I can't remember what, but I went out a day early, and I drove. I landed at like 10 o'clock at night and drove from Denver to Colorado Springs, which is, an hour, to go to the Manitou Incline, which is a former railroad incline that goes up the side of a mountain, and you can hike it now. And as I was driving, I landed, and as I was driving in the car, I still remember the song. Straight Outta Compton came on in my playlist.
Sure.
And I'm driving and singing along to it, and my entire life, I mean, I could sing that song verbatim.
Sure.
In my sleep. But I couldn't think of the words. I was like, what is going on? I couldn't think of the words. And then later I was talking to somebody, and they're like, well, yeah, man, you hadn't acclimated yet. Like your oxygen level was a little bit off.
I thought you'd borrowed some Eddie's gummies and it messed with your mental faculties.
No, brought some back for him probably.
Yeah.
No, but in all honesty, like I couldn't. It's very hard to explain. And I do wonder for the Colts or for teams in Denver in fourth quarter games how much you have to factor that in of the fact that you are going to fatigue late in the game earlier than are the Broncos. Maybe I'm making too much of it, but I do think it's a factor. I just do. Now, not to the point where it like beats you per se, but I think you have to be prepared for the possibility that towards the end of games that you're going to be worn out more so than are the Broncos.
Well, and you would hope that you have people on the roster or within the coaching staff that have experience in those elements, and that's why they have the oxygen tanks on the sidelines. Right. Like, make sure you're monitoring it. But yeah, it's a valid concern, especially your first time playing in those conditions, which is what it is for a lot of these guys, including Anthony Richardson. So yeah, it's a valid point. I just would hope that because it is a common factor playing at Mile High, that you're set and ready to go for that, and that's not going to be something that, not saying it wouldn't be a factor, but that catches you by surprise.
So, Jimmy, you were off for a couple of days, took a couple of personal days. Obviously, yesterday, one of them to go down with Eddie, which was cool that the two of you bonded with that.
We had a great time.
Anything exciting happened for you over the course of the weekend?
Nothing too crazy. I had the opportunity to be on the call for a D3 playoff game. DePaul and Johns Hopkins went at it in Greencastle. That was a lot of fun.
Hopkins won that, right?
They did. Yeah,
okay.
They won on got a false start from the 2. DePaul was driving and looking to put the game away, and they got an illegal procedure and 10-second runoff and lost. So heart breaks the Tigers, but great crowd out there. I hadn't been to that campus in a long time, and it's very nice. It's good to get out there. How about you guys? I mean, I know you probably covered this yesterday, but anything
I was in
relevant
Milwaukee for the weekend. As a matter of fact, Eddie, did you happen to notice what was left for you? Just so you know that I'm a man of my word. Jimmy, go ahead, Eddie.
Oh, how about it? There you go.
Spotted cow. Thank you.
I got the spotted cow. Up. What's that?
Way to pay up.
And here's the other thing.
I still need to pay up, too.
Joel A. Erickson, he's from Wisconsin, so I got his order. And then, as you know, I leave it on his porch late when I get back as the beer fairy. This year, a little uncomfortable because as I was leaving the beer on his porch, his Ring doorbell went off and his dog started barking, and he opened the door and caught the beer fairy in action.
Big dogs? Little dogs?
Golden Retriever.
Nice.
Yeah. But he caught the beer fairy in action, and then
does that mean you have to take the beer back now, and he doesn't
kind
get
of?
it?
I mean, it kind of kills the whole like magic of the season, right?
Yeah.
But nonetheless, one of the big talking points yesterday was the Pacers and their loss to Charlotte, and Rick Carlisle was on this morning with KB and Andy on the wake up call, and essentially his explanation. I thought he sounded very positive and upbeat, and did not have necessarily the doom and gloom forecast of the franchise that has kind of become the one that's the current theme, at least amongst the fan base, about the Pacers because of their struggles lately in losing to Charlotte at home, virtually inexcusable. But he did offer good explanation as to the pieces that they have been missing. Andrew Nembhard and Aaron Nesmith, notably. I mean, Nembhard, they're getting back into the mix. He's still on a minutes count. But Nesmith, and he talked about how with their offense and the pace that they like to play, we talked yesterday about how the Pacers' pace has been off. And the rest of the league seemingly caught up to the speed with which Indiana would play, but they have kind of slowed it down from a year ago. And that fast pace was what made them so unique in the lightning in a bottle offense they had a year ago. And what he was saying was the guys that are the fastest release off of pass entry, catch and shoot guys on their roster are the ones that are not out there. Ben Shepherd, Nesmith being one of them. Matherin is a scorer for them, but Matherin wasn't there during that late push last year when they really started running at a furious pace. Matherin is the ball slows down a little bit more guy. That's not a knock on him. That's just his offensive set. The same with Pascal Siakam. So they've had to kind of adjust, and I think that they're still figuring out how to adjust to that different style of offense that availability has forced them to play. And it's a very valid point. The question, Jimmy, that I still have about Indiana, speaking of the Pacers, is, and I don't know, I mean, at some point, I guess we'll find out definitively what it is. I'm going to just continue to default until we have enough evidence that it's something else elsewhere. But there clearly is something going on in some way, shape, or form with the back of Tyrese Halliburton, or just the play of Tyrese Halliburton, because he simply has not been consistently the guy that he was a year ago.
I think at some point they're going to try to get him a window of rest. I don't know when that's going to happen. I've argued that you can't do it until you get both Neesmith and Nembhard back in full capacity, because the rotation itself is already thin as it is. So, yeah, Halliburton's a concern and will continue to be until they get that figured out. But the other point of frustration that I have, and this has been the thing that Eddie hates about this team the most, you continue to put any average to above average wing on the other side of the floor and they're going to go off. Like Brandon Miller, again, is the main catalyst for why they lose at home to Charlotte over the weekend, because he has 26 and is able to knock down some late free throws to take care of business. I know that we're not asking them to be the elite of the elite defensively, and Rick Carlisle has constantly preached that as long as they are offensively sound, if they're just average to slightly below average defensively, they're going to be fine. You are continuing to put yourself out of reach of sustained success in these games when you can just put a average to above average wing player out there and, well, yeah, he's going to get 20,
Right.
25.
No, you're right.
So that's super frustrating for me. There's still, in theory, in the mix for everything they want to be from a overall standings look with where the East is. But we've talked about this a lot the last couple of weeks. The further you start to fall, the bigger that you're asking once they get healthy to climb out of. Like right now, the separation between them and a playoff, not play in, but playoff spot is about 3 games. If you're not that unique, reliable team you are at home, like if you're not, because they have to be perfect at home. With how bad they've played on the road, the only way to offset that is be the dominant. We're only going to lose 5 or 8 games in Cambridge this year. And now you're, 7-4 within those friendly confines of this stage? So they need to make up that gap somewhere. And my bigger worry, and you've talked about this as well, Jacob, when you sit or try to get rest for Tyrese Halliburton, assuming that is in the cards, and I believe it is, when have you reached a point of no return where that's no longer a viable option because you've fallen so far back in the East?
Right. No, you're right. And again, the two things that we've talked about that they could really use, to your point, wing defender, number one, and I still think they could use a low post goon enforcer. And those guys, neither. But here's the thing. Those are two things that everybody in the league covets. No question about it. By the way, yesterday, as I talked about, Jimmy and Eddie down at Buc-ee's, I did ask them, I said, man, can you believe how many, pumps there are there and everything else? And they said, yeah, the other thing, too, is just because the weather's been crappy, a lot of cars there that probably could use a wash. Not a problem for most people in Central Indiana because they have some sort of a membership to a monthly car wash program. And if you do, not a problem in terms of making sure your car's running great, because so long as you have a monthly car wash program in Central Indiana, you're going to get $20 off a signature service oil change at Jiffy Lube between now and the end of the year. So a couple weeks left to take advantage of this. Simply drive into Jiffy Lube, point it out to the Jiffy Lube team member. See that sticker right there up in my windshield or down on my license plate? I'm part of a monthly car wash program. $20 off your signature service oil change and a free tire rotation. The Jiffy Lube team member will simply take over at Jiffy Lube, the one stop for all your vehicle maintenance needs where you never need an appointment. Big show lined up today. Stephen Holder going to join us, 1 o'clock. Scott Agnes, 2 o'clock. And on the other side, about 5 minutes from now, last night, something hit me that I thought, you know what? It was the blessing for Indiana football that was the gift that was going to be the biggest gift of the year. But maybe it is further away than we thought. And I thought, I wish I didn't have this sort of an insomniac brain that comes up with these nuances and these little things that then all of a sudden they make you go, But a big one about IU football that I'll explain next. This was the number one song in the land the final week of 1991 into the first week of 1992. Michael Jackson's Black or White. December 31st of 1991 was the Copper Bowl in Arizona. Later became known as the Insight.com Bowl. And that New Year's Eve of 1991, I still remember it. I was a freshman in college. I was home from college break. And we watched at Chris Jordan's house as Indiana defeated Baylor. I think it was 30-0. I'd have to let one of you guys fact check the score of the 1991 Copper Bowl. But Indiana defeated Baylor with Vaughn Dunbar and Trent Green and Thomas Lewis. It was a really good team. Incidentally, the same season, the last time that Indiana played Notre Dame. What was the final score of that game, Jimmy?
24-0.
24-0, okay. I was off by a touchdown. But either way, that is the last time that Indiana won a bowl game. They've been to bowl games since. They've been to the Insight.com Bowl. They went to the Pinstripe Bowl against Duke.
Kick was good.
The last time that they won a bowl game, though, even though that was obviously the Duke Pinstripe Bowl game that you speak was a controversial finish, was that game in 1991. So this year, Indiana starts out 6-0, and you're like, holy cow, they're bowl eligible. And then they're 7-0, and you're like, wow, they're not only bowl eligible, they might be going to something beyond the Pull-On Weed Eater Independence Bowl. And then they're 8-0, and it's, oh my gosh, like they might actually play in a bowl game that's named for a restaurant instead of a knockoff apparel brand. And then they're 9-0. Holy cow, they might actually play a bowl game in January. And then they're 10-0, and it's like they're going to a bowl game and they're going to win one. Now, here's the question that I pondered last night during my bout of my typical Monday night insomnia. I'm sitting there, and I'm staring at the ceiling, and I'm thinking about Bill Mallory, Trent Green, Vaughn Dunbar, and that group. And then I'm trying to figure out whether or not Mike Dumas was still there. And then I'm wondering whether or not John Pacey was on the roster or if it wasn't until later when he got to the Independence Bowl and they got beat by Virginia Tech handily. The roof caved in on him. And then I was thinking about Bill Lynch and the Insight.com Bowl, and it's all going through my mind. And I thought, wait a minute. The college football playoff now has expanded to 12 teams, and how wonderful is it that Indiana's included? Hail the mighty Hoosiers, never daunted. There's Indiana. In the year where inevitably, without question, Indiana's streak was going to come to an end and they're going to win a bowl game. And there are a lot of people that think Indiana's going to go up and shock the world and beat Notre Dame. They're going to go up there. Greg Rakestraw said it earlier that Notre Dame Stadium is going to look like a fruitcake. A lot of green and some red sprinkled all throughout. Maybe there are going to be more Indiana fans than one thinks because Notre Dame fans are going to look at it and go, you know what? We beat Indiana. We get to go down and to the Sugar Bowl and play Georgia. So I'm going to sell my tickets for this one because there are a couple of guys that live in Logansport that are diehard IU fans, and they're going to blow off their family Christmas gathering and instead spend all the money to come up here. And sure, they can buy my tickets and buy my airline fare down to New Orleans. Let's go. So let's just say hypothetically that Indiana goes and shocks the world and beats Notre Dame. I don't think they'd be shocking the world, but they go and they beat Notre Dame. Okay? Then they go down to the Sugar Bowl and they face the Georgia Bulldogs. Question marks at quarterback for Georgia. But let's say Georgia, with their defense and their athleticism, is able to hold off Indiana and win. Jimmy, the first round of the college football playoff, you get a bye if you won your conference title or if you are Boise State and you're the highest rank of the non-power fours, whatever, da-da-da-da. We know that now.
Yep.
So the opening round of the college football playoff is simply Indiana at Notre Dame. College football playoff opening round. Is that game labeled? Is it a bowl game? So if Indiana goes and beats Notre Dame and then they lose to Georgia, does the streak continue?
It's a great question. Admittedly, by letter of the law, it's not labeled as a placeholder of a bowl game. It would just be a playoff game. So yes, in theory, the streak would still continue, in my mind.
So Indiana, leave it to Indiana to finally have the year where their streak can come to an end and winning a bowl game and still screw it up, right?
Got to win 2 games.
Because to win a bowl game, they're going to have to go down to New Orleans in the Sugar Bowl and knock off Georgia. Now, I want to know this, Jimmy Cook.
Yeah.
You, and here is do we have a drum roll by chance, Eddie? If we have any sort of a drum roll, I'd like it because we're about to drum roll Jimmy Cook here with the moment of truth serum truth, okay?
Yeah.
You, Jimmy Cook, grew up in the state of Indiana, went to Roncalli.
It's accurate.
Went to Indiana University.
That is accurate.
Grew up a Notre Dame football fan.
That is true.
Moment of truth is here. Your alma mater, historic, biggest game in program history, taking on Notre Dame, the team you grew up watching. You are rooting for. Go.
I've thought about this a lot the last week or last couple of days and week because this was projected as a possible outcome.
Do we have the drum roll still, please?
With how long it's going to take, I don't know if I have the
it-
drum roll.
I don't think he has it. Look, I thought about it, and I thought about my late father because he's the one that started the Notre Dame fandom in our house. And if I was watching with him on Friday the 20th, I would be rooting for Notre Dame. So I think in my heart, I am pulling for the Irish. But that said, my wife's next to the U.S. women's national team. Her favorite team in all of sports is IU football. So if the Hoosiers get it done, I'm going to be very happy for them, albeit a little sad because it's at the cost of my Irish. But
okay.
If you made me say, I just think back to all those Saturdays with my dad, a core memory of my fanhood is the Bush Push. Like that was a defining moment for a lot of my fandom. I think that if I was watching with Papa Cook on the 20th, I'd be rooting for Notre Dame.
Okay. Are you a little bit curious about whether or not there are sometimes in games like that where you're kind of torn?
Yeah.
You just let your natural nerve let you know who you're really rooting for. And if you're watching that game and there is let's say that Notre Dame's up 26-24 with a minute 10 left and Indiana has a 3rd and 8 on the 42 on their own 42, or let's say a 4th and 8.
Sure.
Are you curious to see what your natural tendency is going to be? You know what I mean? Are you going to be pacing like, oh man, I can't watch to see what happens here because Notre Dame needs to stop? Or are you going to be like, oh man, this would be huge for Indiana?
Yeah, I've lived this exercise partially before because my dad went to Butler. Like that's where he got. And so I would have similar instances when Butler would play Indiana, be it in the Crossroads Classic. That was generally where they matched up with of like, oh, how am I going to react situationally to this? When it comes to this matchup, though, like I think this is a very gettable game for Indiana. I texted Kevin Bowen during the USC game, and I told him what I've said all year. I don't trust Riley Leonard. Like, he's a dual-threat quarterback, and he can do it with his legs. If they dare him to pass, like, I don't have this profound confidence in him to go win a game for the Irish.
But
I
Notre
think it's
Dame
very
on the
gettable.
ground is really good.
Yeah,
though.
Jeremiah Love's one of the best running backs in the country. If you can't stop him, you're dead in the water. Like, if you let him have a great day, you're going to be trying to keep pace with them, and it's not going to work out for you.
It is a fascinating matchup because Indiana has been branded and labeled this year as the team that is better than what they're given credit, right?
Yeah.
But you wonder almost if people are saying that because that's what is the easy thing to say about Indiana, okay? On the other hand, Notre Dame, and I mentioned this yesterday, Jimmy, and you've watched them every game, virtually every snap of every game, so you tell me if you disagree. The best thing to happen to Notre Dame was Northern Illinois because as soon as Notre Dame lost that game to Northern Illinois, there was a lot of conversation or thought process of, yeah, typical Notre Dame. We heard about how great they're going to be, and they're going to lose to Northern Illinois, and then who's next? Like they're gonna lose 2 more games they're not supposed to. People are calling for Marcus Freeman's job when they lost to Northern Illinois. But what that did is it allowed them to go. It's kind of like bad analogy time here. Okay, do we have the bad analogy sounder? Eddie, go ahead and feel free to use up the bad analogy sounder here. But it's kind of like the Indianapolis 500 qualifications, where you have that express lane and then the lane where you've got to like wait for the cars that are in front of you in the qualifying line.
Yeah.
And when Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois, it's almost like they just went over into the right, into the express lane where nobody noticed that they were just humming along and they were just bypassing everybody into their path because there was no attention put on Notre Dame and nobody noticed that they were getting better every single week and that they really haven't been challenged because they have not hurt themselves at all and they've played really, really good football and they're very good defensively. They're good on the ground. They control the football. They get leads and don't surrender it. And they may well be one of the 4 best teams in the country. But nobody's talking about it. Nobody paid attention to it because they wrote them off because of Northern Illinois, which might have turned out to be the best thing to happen to them. So you have one team in Indiana where the easy cop-out comment is, well, give them credit. I mean, they're better than people think. Just because their name is Indiana doesn't mean that they're terrible. And then you have the other side of Notre Dame, which was that people were like, well, I mean, they're just people think they're great because they're Notre Dame. But in reality, because they lost that game, they weren't paying attention. And they, in fact, are a very, very good team. I think Notre Dame, especially when you look at the bracket, oddly enough, Oregon, who's ranked number 1, and Ohio State, who most people think is perhaps the most talented team not named Oregon in the entire field, and those two have got a gauntlet to go through. The easier bracket's the one down below. You get through, if you're Notre Dame, you get through Indiana, and then you get what may be a backup quarterback-led Georgia that's already had multiple losses. And then who do you get? Is it Boise State?
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
Look, I mean, I'm not going to let myself in that Notre Dame fandom dream that far because this team has let me down a number of times over the years. But yeah, in theory, and you can make the same case for Indiana because they would be taking on a backup, in theory, Georgia quarterback as well. They have the great path to the draw. In regards to what you bring up about Notre Dame, yes, a lot of people wrote them off after Northern Illinois. The thing that got lost with their schedule, and so many people want to point to it and say, oh, well, they didn't really play anybody, and you lose to the 7th-place team in the MAC, that should be a disqualifier. They took care of business against everybody else they played. They had to run the gauntlet. They knew that. A 2-loss Notre Dame team, with one of those losses being Northern Illinois, was not going to get in. And outside of the Louisville game, they really weren't challenged. Like USC flirted around late, and then you have 2 pick sixes to seal that game. Everybody was talking about Army and Navy and the great seasons that the academies were having, and they blew them out. Like, they blew them both out. People were thinking after the NIU loss that they were just going to lay down and have this awful season, and they put up insane numbers, kind of like Kurt Cignetti and Indiana did, against whoever was in front of them on the schedule. I think it's going to be a great game. I don't know yet where I would give a true edge, but I'll stand by what I said. I don't trust Riley Leonard if it comes down to him with his arm. I just don't.
A guy for Indiana that might be somebody that we can further trust moving forward. Not on the football side, but the basketball side, because he looked good last night, and it helped Indiana with a win over Minnesota. We'll discuss that and Stephen Holder coming up about 17 minutes from now. So once you guys got back from your Buc-ee's venture, and, I mean, you both got your workout in because you had to push the car once you – Eddie, you seem bitter about that. I mean, I can't say I blame you, right?
Well, because I wanted to drive Jake, and Jimmy was like, "No, I'm driving." I'm like, "Okay, whatever you say."
I was just trying to be nice.
Now,
I just
Buc-ee's has its own exit.
Selfishly,
That's how they do it.
I wanted to write in Lee and all. That's what I wanted to do. So
Nice.
Now, how far were you from the Buc-ee's when you had to push?
We were about half a mile from the exit ramp.
That's rough.
Of course, man. It's uphill.
And the exit's uphill, right?
Yeah,
the ramp.
both ways.
Yeah, in the snow.
That's rough. Now, which one? I'd like to know this. Who pushed and who steered? Were there any other volunteers that took pity on you?
I think there's only one answer. We both know who steered and who pushed here. Come on now.
Okay.
And once they saw this melon, Jake, they knew who it was, so they started helping.
That's right. Of course. Fair enough. But once you got inside the Buc-ee's, you could refuel with some of that fabulous. They have a lovely like coconut pudding dealio that's pretty good.
Yep.
And then some like rattlesnake jerky.
Don't sleep on the brisket. The brisket's delightful.
Yes.
Hot brisket on the board.
Oh yeah.
On the board last night, Bryson Tucker was for Indiana. He had 16 in the Hoosiers' win to open up Big Ten play over Minnesota. Look, they continue to get good play down low. We talked about it yesterday with Don Fisher and the fact that I think Indiana's game this year, Jimmy, their bread and butter is going to be on the low post between Ballo and Malik Renew. And Renew is their most consistent player. If you're counting on Indiana getting consistent outside shooting and scoring from Mackenzie Mbako, who is a talented guy, don't get me wrong, but it just feels like the consistency there is just simply not too big a challenge, right?
Well, I think it's roster wide, and that's the biggest thing that's frustrating to me, not just for Mbako, but for the entire 24-25 Hoosiers, and we said the same thing about the 23-24 Hoosiers, and we've said the same thing about every IU team in the Mike Woodson era. For whatever reason, efficiency from beyond the arc is not a consistent thing you're going to get on a nightly basis. And you might be able to get by in some Big Ten matchups with it, like you did against Minnesota, but it's not a new thing, this modernization, if you will, of the game of basketball, be it collegiately or in the NBA. Like the three-point shot is the great equalizer, and the fact that still on a nightly basis you look at any IU box score and it's 4 of 14 or 3 of 16 or whatever it is frustrating. And again, it didn't matter last night because it's another win for them, but it certainly is going to matter when they're up against the likes of the best of the Big Ten.
But there was, I thought, really good contribution from two players, okay? You know, Bryson Tucker was a guy coming in that you knew was going to be somebody that could give them some points and be a scorer for them coming off the bench. But it's not easy, especially for a young guy. You don't know just how long it's going to take for him to acclimate. But they've started to work him in now to the point where he looks like he's going to be a very reliable is maybe the wrong word, because young players, you still one night to the next, it can, you can have yin and yang. But I like the fact that in a conference game like that, he's not afraid to come in and not only shoot, but just be active, around the glass in other areas, a versatile player for them. And then, Carlisle is one. We talked so much about Miles Rice at the beginning of the season and what he was able to do in trying to run that offense. But the other transfer in Carlisle, he at least is able to come in and knock down a few threes. And I like the fact that after the game, he said, look, I'm not worried about, and this was the key for me that I liked. It's one thing to say, I'm not worried about my role, I just want to help my team win. But a guy that's been through it already at another program and a transfer in, then you look at it and go, okay, I think there's legitimacy in his claim there of, you know what, like, I've been to the big academy, right? I've been and I've played at Stanford out in another league. And I'm here now at a program like this. I do think that he's a guy that's like, it doesn't matter to me at what point in the game I get on the floor, so long as I'm on the floor doing what I can to help Indiana win. That's more of what they need. They got it last night.
Yeah, I mean, the addition of Carlisle and Tucker going into this season, you knew were going to be big contributions, and you add in both of them and throw in as well guys like Miles Rice to take some of that pressure off M'Bako. You want to be able to rely on that on a nightly basis, especially from downtown. And it worries me. Like I'm happy with the win. I'm happy that they are still, in the mix for what they want to be as they get into the real meat of Big Ten conference play. But that has been the biggest bugaboo, has been 3-point shooting for them since Mike Woodson's been there. And in part, their dedication to two big lineups, where I think they'd be better off with, a one big with a smaller look lineup. I'm curious if it is an issue that we continue to harp on, Jake, this season, where a year ago, how many times did you and I look at game film or the box score of an Indiana game and it be, well, of course they lost because they can't operate as anything other than a one-dimensional offense.
Oh, I mean,
I think the influx of talent, to your point, of Tucker and Carlisle, along with Ballo and M'Bako, makes for a nice unit. But is that consistency there on a nightly basis because of those additions, where a year ago you didn't have that offensive consistency, and on top of that, you were never a threat outside of action inside the arc?
Yeah, the ability to shoot the ball from the outside is the one thing for Indiana that, and I know that I'm beating a horse to the point now where it's glue, but
it hasn't been fixed. It's not your
that's
fault.
what I
You
mean.
should
What I was going to say
continue to beat it until it gets fixed.
It is amazing that of all places, Indiana can't find guys that can shoot consistently from the outside, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't look, going out and getting a guy in his 5th year that's a transfer that shot the ball well elsewhere, that helped. But I mean, you want guys from the get-go that are plug-in, pure shooters right away, and it seemingly they grow on trees around here. So why they can't find them, I can't say, right?
I mean, Mike Woodson was supposed to be the teacher of modern NBA-style offense, and there's too many times throughout the course of the Big Ten season where they look like they're stuck playing in the 70s and 80s.
And look at Tamar Bates. He just lit up Kansas the other night.
Yeah, he did.
When Missouri defeated the
Is he
Jayhawks.
like 31 years old?
That's pretty crazy.
Not sure. I mean, Minnesota had a dude in his 8th year last night.
Honestly, Tamar Bates has got to be. How old is that dude? He had a huge game last year. There was some game. Remember, he had a 30-point night. By the way, in terms of college basketball, the unbeaten's left because you mentioned Kansas. I think Jimmy, didn't you take Drake?
I did take Drake, yeah.
And I took Utah State, right?
Correct. Yes.
There are 2 of the 4 left.
Yep.
Loyola, Rhode Island, Utah State, and Drake. That's it. Eddie, who did you take?
Tennessee lost, right? Or did Tennessee lose? No, Tennessee is still undefeated.
Is Tennessee still undefeated?
Yeah.
Okay. Who did you take?
I took the Ramblers.
Okay.
We warned him after. Did you see? I don't know if you talked about this yesterday. Did you see the overcompensation on the Sister Jean fist bump the next home game?
Crowd surfing?
What'd you say?
Did they have her crowd surfing?
They did not have her crowd surf, but every player gave a very enthusiastic fist bump the next Ramblers home game.
Stephen Holder covers the Colts. ESPN joins us next. No Rocky Mountain High for you there, Eddie?
I haven't had any of my gummies yet that you just gave me, so no.
Is the thought then,
Don't blame me.
since he couldn't do that, we just panic and play a John Denver song? I guess
It is
that
Denver,
the plan?
I guess, and the Colts are getting ready to go there, right?
Thank you.
Stephen Holder joins us, and I'm sure thrilled to be doing so based on that intro from the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. Stephen, before we get to the Colts, I have a college football question for you where we are going to let you, as the objective observer, serve as judge and jury. Are you ready?
Does he get a drum roll? Or is that just for me?
Okay, I thought this was going to be a Clemson-Miami thing, but go ahead.
Well, first off, listen, if you can get this right, Stephen, I'm going to put you on the spot here.
All right.
I'll give you significant props and maybe even, matter of fact, I will purchase for you the title sponsor item if you can tell me the bowl game that your Miami Hurricanes are playing in without looking it up.
I actually know this. It was a very popular topic in the group chat that I'm in with college classmates. It is the Pop-Tarts Bowl, which is
Yes.
the subject of great ridicule, okay, in my group chat, okay? Trust me.
Which, by the way, in terms of breakfast, here's the thing about that's fascinating. In terms of breakfast, the entire point of Pop-Tarts is you would not need a bowl. But I guess in terms of late-night munchie habits, you might need Pop-Tarts after a bowl, right?
Okay, fair. Another interesting Pop-Tart debate, toasted or not toasted?
Oh, non.
Not toasted.
Yeah, non.
No, you people
Wrong.
are psychopaths. You
No,
gotta toast it.
no, grab it out
No.
the box and let's go, baby.
Okay,
No, you people
what
are
about this?
crazy.
What is your favorite? Because now I got to buy them for you because you knew they're in the Pop-Tarts bowl. What's your favorite Pop-Tart?
Yeah, man, I don't really buy them that much, but I don't know, the strawberry probably, I guess.
Well, there we go. I guess when mythically I take you to another Pacer game, or we go to, I shouldn't say take you, when we go to a Pacer game together, I'll bring you some Pop-Tarts.
Well, that would be the capper. There
Gotta
you
go brown cinnamon sugar. That's my
That's a
go-to.
good one. Okay,
Not
Stephen,
bad, not bad.
here's my question for you, and I'm being actually serious in this. Indiana has not won a bowl game since 1991, okay? Indiana's 11-1. They made the college football playoff. They have to go to Notre Dame. That is simply a college football playoff game. If they beat Notre Dame, then they go to the Sugar Bowl where they face Georgia.
Right.
Does the Notre Dame win count as a snap of the bowl game win streak, even though it's listed as a road playoff game and not technically a bowl game?
That is tricky. I mean, it feels like it should, because if it doesn't, that sucks. Because you could have gone to the Pop-Tarts Bowl, for example,
Right.
and won.
Right.
But man, I feel like we're penalizing them for doing well if we don't give it to them. I don't know. It is a gray area, though. I don't know. I say they've earned it. Give it to them, but there might be an asterisk on that one.
Exactly. It's a tricky one,
Could
right?
you redefine it as just a postseason win, and that would still fit the same bill if they haven't had a postseason win since '91?
Okay, that's decent. That's a
You know
decent
what?
compromise.
You could be a reporter. You could do this job, because half of what I do, I mean, obviously you're in media, but like half of what I do is figure out a way to make what I'm trying to say true. Right? It's like, well, that doesn't mean what I think it means, but well, if we say it like this, it actually does work, right? And so, look, I don't mislead people, but I just have to make sure that, there's no holes in the things that I write. That's like 90. That's like not 90%, but it's a big percentage of the job. Is this actually true?
Jimmy, I'm going to buy you a Henry Clay cigar because you are the great compromiser with that.
All right,
with
then.
what you came up with there. Simply
I like
postseason win drought. That's good.
I like that.
Okay, Stephen, this is obviously essentially a playoff game for the Colts coming up with the Denver Broncos. Is this the biggest game so far in the career of Anthony Richardson?
I think so. Yes. And in fact, I asked Shane Steichen about this yesterday. I think there's great value in him playing in games like this, win or lose, because this is where you make your money. This is where you define what you are. You got to go on the road, win a game that you got to have. I don't know if they're going to win. I'm not picking them to win because that wouldn't be prudent. I think they can, but I don't necessarily expect them to. But that being said, I do think, yes, this is the biggest game he's played in. For Anthony Richardson, each of these last few games has been a building block, particularly the ones where he's had the game-winning drives. Those are huge building blocks, right? It's a much bigger building block if you can go on the road, beat a team with a winning record, with the playoffs potentially hanging in the balance. That will say, I think, more about him than anything he's done in the last two big wins that he's had, even though those were quite impressive. So I agree with that. I think it would say so much about his growth, particularly against, a Vance Johnson defense, Vance Joseph defense, excuse me. So, yes, I'd love to see what he can do.
In that same vein, Stephen, I had brought this up earlier, among other reasons I'd like to see the Colts win against Denver is it creates exactly what you were asking for, which is now these final 3 games of the season are meaningful games. Like, not to say they're not helpful for reps, because that's at the core what matters for Anthony Richardson, but the idea of getting to play in 4 playoff games to close the year effectively and then hope that Denver stubs their toe again, I think is more meaningful than just, hey, here's 3 more games to his repertoire.
100%. I think it's much more meaningful, and it will tell us more about him as well. Because just going out there and playing with kind of nothing on the line, you take away that element of I don't know if stress is the right word, but the magnitude of the games. Because if you're just playing out there, like Bryce Young right now is playing better, but I mean he also is just kind of winging it. He's just like whatever happens, right? And to his credit, he's doing well. Now, when you add a layer of importance to those games, that changes things. And that is a question we need answered about the quarterback. Every team needs that answered. Okay, first of all, can you play? Then can you play under difficult circumstances? On the road, big game, playoffs on the line, all those kinds of things, they add layers of complexity, that tell us more about you. So I do think it would be different than Anthony Richardson just playing in games just to play out the string and get the reps. Reps are great, but reps that are meaningful, that's a different ballgame.
Stephen, several people have asked, and it's a good question that needs a follow-up. When you were asking toasted or not when it comes to Pop-Tarts, did you mean the Pop-Tarts themselves or you when you're eating them?
Because that is actually a fair question. Well, no, I was going to give an answer that probably would have provided too much information from my past. But
you meant the Pop-Tarts need to be toasted, right?
Right. Let's just say I went to college, right? Let's leave it at that.
Okay.
You could be like Eddie and say you've been to Colorado. Either one is fine. I mean,
that's right. Fair enough.
Seattle.
There you go.
Hey, Stephen, where do things stand with Josh Downs? I mean, I would assume, obviously, that he's going to be a go in Denver. But to me, I think one thing that has been really magnified during his absence is just how important he is to helping the Colts offense run. You agree?
Oh, 100%. First, to answer the question, I don't think it's necessarily a lock that he plays, but let's see what happens. I think definitely the injury was not as severe as it could have been, so it's a minor injury, so that's good. But he's got to get back out there. Having the bye was huge at the time that they had it, so I think odds are good. But let's at least see how it goes this week. Anyway, I agree with that 100%. I think that they have sort of a flawed wide receiver unit. I've said all year long that I really like this group, and I do. I still do. But I think a couple of things are just kind of realistic that we have to acknowledge. Number one, Michael Pittman, I think in terms of explosiveness, that's not his thing. And then he's hurt, and he's still kind of dealing with that injury. I thought he was a bit better, I think, in the last game before the bye, and maybe he got some needed rest. Maybe he'll feel better. But he hasn't been, I think, at his optimum performance this year, clearly. Then you have Alec Pierce, who I really like, and I think is going to be a guy who I think makes some money in this league. However, once his role, I think, gets beyond what it has been defined as, which is kind of the deep threat, and I had advocated at one point, like, hey, maybe you guys should get more out of this guy, give him more of a role. He doesn't always rise to the occasion, I think, in that role. And I think that was true to a degree in New England until that final drive where he made obviously the biggest play of the game, catching that touchdown. But there's flaws there. And then there's A.D. Mitchell, where I don't know what to do with A.D. Mitchell at this point. Just really frustrating.
And that's not the first time you've expressed that, Stephen. And not to cut you off on that, but I want to dive into that on A.D. Mitchell, because we, and I don't mean you specifically, but we, like within the media core of the Colts, are consistently reminded of the fact that Reggie Wayne, his position coach, it wasn't until really midway through year 2 where Reggie Wayne got things going, and typically that was the timeline for receivers. Why should we be able to make early judgment on A.D. Mitchell versus others that we've seen? What shows you that in fact there are concerns?
Well, I would say it's not concern as much as just reality, which is I don't think he's ready. I don't think he's there yet. Now, his talent is why he's out there. His talent is undeniable. And at some point, you have to at least see if he can do it. And with Josh Downs out, back to your original point, I said all that to say earlier, like these guys have flaws. I said all that to say that Josh Downs has been like the most complete guy this year. He's been their most complete receiver, not just maybe the best, but the most complete. So that's, I think, an important addition and distinction to make. So anyway, on A.D. Mitchell, I just think we got to a point where it was like, okay, this guy early in the season, he clearly was not ready. They pulled back on the reps, on the snaps that he was playing. And so now in recent weeks, he's gotten a little bit more. And then with Josh Downs out, they had to play him. Well, he did not live up to that opportunity. He just did not. And I think at this point, maybe the thing you got to do is just pull back again, and you got to maybe try again next year. I don't mean he doesn't play at all, but I mean he doesn't play like substantial snaps at this point. I don't know how you can put him out there. It's okay to say he's not ready. That doesn't mean we're writing him off. You can't write off a guy this talented. He's extremely talented. He is physically, from a talent perspective, A.D. Mitchell is the best wide receiver on this roster. But that has nothing to do with whether you can do the job and whether you can be counted on. And so far, the answer to that is no. But that doesn't mean, as you laid out with Reggie Wayne, it took a while. It doesn't mean it won't happen. And I think with the talent that he has, if he can put it together, he's going to be a fantastic player. But we cannot assume that that's going to happen.
Here's the thing, Stephen, with A.D. Mitchell, has he shown yet that he can make difficult catches? In other words,
no.
I know that his physicality and his burst, Shane Steichen said his wiggle, so to speak, allows him to get open, but can he make difficult catches?
No, he's not making difficult catches. In fact, he's not making some routine catches. And so I just think that disqualifies you from playing meaningful snaps. It just does. The stakes are high for them right now, right? I mean, they can't afford it. So they've given him some opportunities on some key plays, like some third downs. They've gone to him, and you got to come through, man. And I'm not saying every ball's been perfect, but rookie or no rookie, you got to come through at some point, and that has not happened. So it's okay to pull back and say, all right, he needs time. That's where I'm at with A.D. Mitchell. That's not a knock on him like permanently. It's just right now that's where they're at.
Stephen Holder is our guest, covers the Colts for ESPN.com. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Stephen, it's been well documented the defensive struggles at times from the Colts, ranking towards the bottom in both rush and pass defense. This is a Denver team that kind of can do it from both ends of an offensive attack. Bo Nix has been, a godsend for them this year. When you look at the Broncos compared to what the Colts are defensively, is there area where they can create edge opportunities to kind of shift and slow down what Denver's been able to do offensively?
Well, one thing that they have to do, I think, is get a couple turnovers. They've relied on turnovers to kind of mitigate this inability to get off the field at times. Teams are converting a lot of third downs on them and some explosive plays as well. But so why have they, for example, not been a team that gives up a ton of points? I mean, they're looking at it here. They're 18th in opponent points per game. I mean, that's fine. They're sort of middle of the pack there. Now, if you look at them in terms of like yards per game and things like that, they're way toward the bottom, way down toward the bottom. So the reason those two things that they're not in the same neighborhood in points per game and yards per game and things relevant to that is because they have gotten turnovers and gotten off the field. Like you look at the New England game, they did not do that. They didn't get the turnovers, at least not in those timely moments where they had to get a stop. And so you saw New England consistently driving down the field. So it became who had the ball last, right? They've got to get a couple of those. I think Bo Nix has, I don't remember the number, but he has thrown a fair number of picks. So there's maybe some opportunities there. So that's one thing they can do. I also think, look, I mean, if they can shut the run down, they can give themselves a chance. Put the young quarterback in long down and distance, and that is where you want to be. That's where you want to be. As you play long down and distance, that gives your zone defense kind of a chance to work. When you've got third and short, that's where I think quarterbacks have that edge in the zone defense, because as soon as the receiver gets off the line of scrimmage, you can deliver that ball pretty quickly. You only need if you need 3rd and 3 and they're playing zone, and I think that's an advantage to the offense in some cases. So, and Bo Nix is a guy who will get rid of the ball quickly, and that works well with the Sean Payton offense. So anyway, I just think that they have to shut the run down and then get some turnovers. Those are two things that come to mind for me, how the Colts can maybe make this tougher on Bo Nix.
Well, Bo Nix kind of was in so much of young quarterback play. Stephen Holder's our guest from ESPN. He's on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. So much of good, effective young quarterback play, Stephen, to me, is I would almost rather have a good quarterback be placed into a situation where everything around him is excellent for him than an excellent quarterback that has good to less than good placed around him. In other words, I think you get what I'm saying there. Bo Nix, it seems like Bo Nix it was just custom made and everything has kind of been built around him for this situation. And that's why it's working. Agreed?
Yeah, and I think there's another thing he's benefited from, which is Sean Payton's system. Look, we saw.
Well, that's what I mean.
Sean
Like Payton kind of felt like his system, that this was the guy that was best for his system, right?
Yes. I mean, you look at the Russell Wilson situation, right? I mean, Russell Wilson's playing much better football now than he was last season, and I just think the fit was bad. Him and Sean Payton, that was a bad fit. Clearly, it doesn't mean that Russell played great, and maybe that was just problem with the offense. I'm not saying that. I mean, there were issues, but look, your quarterback, particularly a guy like Sean Payton, who is very much like, hey, I've been doing this a long time, and my system is proven and it works. Well, he wants the quarterback to run what he runs, and Russell Wilson's a different kind of quarterback than Sean Payton is ideally suited for. So this is a good match, and I think Payton really saw in Bo Nix a guy who could effectively run what he runs, and it's working well. I mean, they don't. I mean, just looking at his yards per attempt, I mean, they're not necessarily juggernauts with big plays and that kind of thing. 6.5 yards per pass attempt is just it's just fine. It's nothing special, but he's executing, right? And that's what it boils down to. He's executing, and that's how you get the job done. He also, by the way, has rushed for 300 yards this year, by the way. So there's a little bit of that issue they had last week with New England. You've got to watch that quarterback and make sure you don't let him get out and run away from you.
By the way, did you know that there's a bowl game called the Snoop Dogg Arizona Bowl?
I don't believe you.
I'm not kidding you.
The Snoop Dogg what?
Arizona Bowl. It should be the Snoop Dogg Smoke Bowl, right?
Well, yeah, it should. Well, so let me get this straight. So, like, normally it's named after a product, this presenting sponsor. Like, how does this work? Is Snoop Dogg sponsoring the?
Didn't Jimmy Kimmel have one?
Yeah, Jimmy Kimmel had a bowl. Gronk had a bowl.
I think Jimmy Kimmel might have been the Arizona Bowl. Is that what they do each year? Do they pick a different celebrity?
Could have been. I don't remember where Gronk's was, but Gronk had a bowl game. I think it was L.A.
The better thing is participating in the Snoop Dogg Arizona Bowl is Miami of Ohio. Taking on Colorado State. Colorado State at least fits a little bit. But all right, last question, Stephen. Can you tell me? since you have proven your worth on knowing that Miami is in the Pop-Tarts Bowl, can you tell me either of these two questions? Where it's located or what it was previously known as?
Oh, man. So I do know it's in Orlando, but that's because when I heard they were in the Pop-Tarts Bowl, I went down a rabbit hole. So,
okay,
as you can imagine. Now, I am curious, which game was this formerly? Was this the Citrus or was it something else?
Thank you for asking. Are you ready?
I would love to know.
Formerly known as the Sunshine Classic, the Blockbuster Bowl, the CarQuest Bowl, the Micron PC Bowl, the MicronPC.com Bowl, the Visit Florida Tangerine Bowl, the Mazda Tangerine Bowl, the Champ Sports Bowl, the Russell Athletic Bowl, the Camping World Bowl, and the Cheez-It Bowl.
Okay. Wow. So the Cheez-It was the most recent, I think.
Cheez-It, I think, is Cheez-It. The Cheez-It folk just got tired and they moved to another bowl game.
Okay, sure, whatever.
Actually, the Cheez-It Bowl should be the Snoop Dogg Bowl, personally, I think. But the Cheez-It Bowl, there is still a Cheez-It Bowl, but it is no longer that one. So I think Cheez-It was shopping their brand around, and they hooked up with somebody else.
So, fun fact, you mentioned that history there. You mentioned the Micron PC Bowl. I am like 99% sure I covered that like 20 years ago. I don't know who was in it. I can't even tell you. It might have been Florida State. I don't know. But I was there. I don't remember who played. It was very memorable, clearly. But anyway, that's a fun fact for you that you didn't care about.
I got to look here because, okay, the Cheez-It Bowl is now the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl, and that's South Carolina and Illinois.
Okay, again, sure, whatever. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, At what point do we stop caring about all this? This is the problem with the playoffs, though, right?
Well, the problem with the playoffs is it's the conference championships that are going to become by the wayside because for a lot of these schools, if you look, for example, at the ACC championship game, I mean, SMU and Clemson fans, there were 30,000 people there, right? Because for a lot of them, it's like, well, look, if you win, you're going to go into the playoff and play a game somewhere, so let's save our money for that, right?
That example is 100%. Weird for me, admittedly, though, because we talked about that last week. At least for Clemson, like, it was do or die.
Correct.
Your other example, you brought up Oregon and Penn State,
better,
it really didn't
Oregon
matter.
And Penn State,
right.
why would you come, right?
Yeah, no, there's all kinds of potential pitfalls. Look, don't get me wrong. I'll be on the edge of my seat for the playoff, but there are lots of unintended consequences to all of this that I think are going to be interesting, and I don't even think we know them all yet. So it'll be interesting. Yeah.
Now, the Tony the Tiger Sun Bowl is Louisville and Washington. Needless to say, that will be a great game, right?
Tony the Tiger. I mean, Snoop Dogg could be the sponsor for half of these.
Oh, for really sure, right? It is just now and then of course the most horrific. Minnesota and Virginia Tech in the Duke's Mayo Bowl. That's actually fairly fitting because like people in Minnesota are nothing but it's mostly fat people that eat mayonnaise, right? Isn't that what mostly you have in Minnesota? Hey, Daryl.
I thought you were going somewhere else.
Hey, tell me this: if you were a coach, Jake, and the only invitation that you got
not going.
was the Duke's Mayo Bowl.
Sorry, kids.
You'd turn it down.
Sorry, kids. We're doing nothing to do with mayonnaise. Nope. Not going to
Will
do
Levis written all over it.
Turning around this car right now. We'll go to the Bahamas Bowl if we have to, but we're not going to the Duke's Mayo Bowl. All right, Steven, I appreciate it. Good luck watching the Pop-Tarts Bowl, even though we'll talk to you between now and then.
All right, guys. I'll see you soon.
All right, Stephen Holder on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line, who I now owe a box of strawberry Pop-Tarts. Some of the Pop-Tarts stuff they went too far with. Like, I do like Pop-Tarts, but there's like a fudge, like chocolate fudge one. It's a little much. Trying too hard.
Hot Fudge Sundae?
Is Hot Fudge Sundae one of them?
It's like one of the best ones there is out there.
You think so?
Yeah.
Okay, what about it's like chocolate chip dough or something.
Chocolate chip cookie
dough?
They
had a cookie dough line. They had cookies and cream, which is pretty good.
Banana pudding, I think.
Okay,
apple pie.
Banana pudding doesn't sound bad.
They had a partnership with Apple Jacks at some point, so it was like an Apple Jack pop.
Yeah, the Apple Jack one, also a no-go. The other day, I had a strange hankering for Cracker Jack, Apple Jack, middle of the night. I kid you not.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know what?
Did you get up and go to Meijer at 3 in the morning?
Marshmallow hot cocoa.
I got up and got a big family-sized box of Cracker Jack.
Pumpkin pie.
Apple Jack, excuse me.
Are you thinking of chocolate fudge?
Chocolate fudge, okay.
Okay, that one's a little much.
But they tried too hard on that. But I bought this big thing of Applejack, this big box, and I got home and I took care of my craving.
Yeah.
And now I have
A big box.
92% full box of Applejack sitting in my house. And probably it'll be 2 years again before I get a hankering for some Applejack.
You have it now, though.
I do. Scott Agness going to join us, by the way, coming up in the 2 o'clock hour. But Rick Carlisle this morning said a couple of interesting things about the Pacers. We'll let you know what he said, and we'll do it on the other side. Rick Carlisle this morning joined, as he does pretty much every Tuesday, Kevin and Andy on the wake-up call, and don't know if you had a chance to listen to it, Jimmy. I thought he had some interesting things to say, including, I thought he was upbeat, to be honest with you, when asked about whether or not it's hard to be positive, and he was like, not at all. It's not at all, because there are still things that we can find that we're doing right. And did Rick Carlisle a compelling case. No one would know better than Rick Carlisle what's going on with the Pacers. And if, in fact, Carlisle was trying to, I guess for lack of a better phrase, sugarcoat or mask things, he did a pretty good job of selling it, because essentially what he said was the style that last year the Pacers played, and I'm paraphrasing and summarizing what he said. But last year what made the Pacers unique, if you go back and you think about the in Las Vegas game against the Lakers for the in-season tournament last year, in that game, they got down, they were down 8-10 most of that game, and then all of a sudden they went on a couple of sprees where they cut it close. And, I remember the broadcast saying, this is the thing about the Pacers. You can never rule them out because this offense is so potent. And the same thing happened in New York in the playoffs last year, where they got down early in one of the games and they come roaring back. I mean, they were down 15 or 17, and then they go on a run, and it's like, holy cow, here they go. And that's what made them so unique. And then going into this season, there was talk of, hey, if you are going into the season here and you're expecting us to play that same pace, the league has told us that it's going to be different, because things are, they're going to be calling things differently this year. It's going to be more of the FIBA style, and things are going to slow down. And it was almost like the Pacers were bracing for that more than the rest of the league, because everybody else kept playing fast. And then you look and everybody else is scoring a bunch of points and the Pacers are lagging behind, and you wonder if they were overcompensatory for some reason in the way that they were playing. But I thought Carlisle made a very good explanation where he said, look, to play that pace, you've got to have three things, essentially. You got to have, and he didn't mention this one, but you got to have a healthy or a fully in-tuned Halliburton. I don't know if we have the first or not. I don't know whether he's fully healthy. I know he has not been totally in tune. I mean, his game has just been off, Halliburton. But the other thing, and maybe this is part of what it is the pace in which even Halliburton wants to play, or the Pacers want to play, is reliant on fast ball movement and fast shot upon rotation of the basketball. And the two guys that do that the best, he was saying, was Carlisle, are in no particular order, Nesmith and Shepherd. And they're both out. And so that slows things down, because then your operating areas offensively and the guys that you are getting the ball to as your first and second prerogatives, let's say if you are Halliburton, is either Nembhard, but he's on a minute restriction. So then your other two become Mathurin and Siakam. They are not quick stop and draw guys. They are kind of put the ball on the floor guys, and it does slow things down a little bit. Not to say that means that you can't be effective with those guys. Simply to say that, the offense, in the way that it was humming, it is a different personnel mindset, even though I realized that last year in the playoffs, Siakam was there. But Mathurin was not. So now with Mathurin and Siakam kind of being your dual set Batmans, if you will, the pace, it seems as though, is hurt a little bit, right?
I'm not going to sit here and make excuses for the Pacers, because the struggles are real, but I think what can't get lost in all of this, regardless of my feelings on Benedict Mathurin and him being a starter caliber player in the NBA, they're down two starters for most of this season, at least out of the gate, with no Nembhard and no Nesmith. They have Nembhard back. His minutes are starting to increase. Winds up playing, 30, 31 minutes against the Hornets on Sunday. So you feel like that the kid gloves are starting to come off there, and he's going to be turned loose. And then you get Neesmith back, and I have a hard time fully judging what the Pacers have gone through this year and connecting to what they can be the rest of the season without acknowledging the fact that they've been down those two pieces who are very critical to what their overall identity is. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't be able to still patchwork it with the continued growth of Mathurin, and in theory, a fully healthy Tyrese Halliburton that could carry some of that weight. And we know how important Miles Turner and Pascal Siakam are to the overall flow of this offense. But I am still having, for lack of a better phrase, my jury be still out on this team until they're back to full strength. Because, yeah, you look at them right now, are they probably closer to the Nets and the Raptors than they are the Bucks and the Celtics? Yeah, probably. But they also aren't a complete team right now. And I know that'll only get you so far, but that gives me pause to figure out and rush to judgment exactly what this team is, because they are going to get those reinforcements back. And you would think they're going to be active in some capacity at the deadline. That gets undercut if Halliburton continues to regress, and if this winds up being a prolonged back issue that he's going to have to deal with the rest of this season and beyond. That's concerning. But, Jake, I have a hard time fully giving out grades to this team and evaluating them when the expanded playoff and play-in tournament allows for larger margin of error for teams that are living on the edge. And the Pacers, at minimum right now, are a living on the edge team. Like, they would have to fully self-implode to ways you or I can't imagine to not be in the play-in conversation at season's end. And I know for most Pacers fans, that's probably not good enough because of, you've seen Paris last year, right? You get all the way to the conference finals and you think, okay, we're now a big player in the East, and it was sold with running it back with this team that you're going to be a big player in the East. For me, as long as they get healthy, be it the play-in or the playoff, and yes, I'd like them to be a top 6 seed, but at full strength with Halliburton, with Neesmith, with Nembhard, with Siakam, with Turner, with Mathurin, at full strength, I'll take their chances against any team in the East, including your potential matchup in a play-in game, if we're going to say that's where they're stuck, which would be against the likes of Atlanta, Brooklyn, or Chicago.
Excuse me, who was that second
Brooklyn,
team?
I apologize.
Thank you. Yes,
Nobody
Brooklyn.
says that.
No,
Nobody says that.
I would disagree, Eddie.
Nobody says that.
I would strongly disagree. Over
Nobody
the
says
course of the radio show that I've done, oftentimes one of the things that people come up to me, they say, "Oh, Brooklyn." Brooklyn has become, even for that matter, Derek will say Brooklyn. Jimmy also says Brooklyn. I mean, you can be on the outside.
It's because none of these people have the audacity to stand up to you.
Well, you don't have the height to.
Well, I don't need to have the height.
Okay.
I've got the spirit. I've got the heart.
And the head size.
What's that?
I've got the heart.
Well, listen. Who brought you your beer and your gummy bears today, or your gummy whatever they are?
Well, you did. That's for sure.
Uh huh. Yeah. See.
What's that?
By the
got
way,
to do
we
with
have
anything?
not done.
Don't bite the hand that feeds,
You know
Eddie.
what we have not done so far this year?
What's that?
We have not revisited something that we did a year ago. It's as if we are stuck in year one of doing it, and we didn't carry on the tradition.
This saddens me.
I know. I'm all about tradition.
Yeah.
There's a tradition that we have not yet done that we did a year ago, and we dropped the ball on this year. And I will let you guys decide whether or not we're too late to do it.
All right.
See if you can guess what it is. Okay, Eddie, you received your 6-pack payoff of Spotted Cow beer.
I did.
And that payoff is because of your victory in what little game that we play?
The Major League Baseball playoffs selection.
Okay.
I still owe Eddie. I need to know what you want. I
know.
Owe you for
I need
that.
to pay off both of you.
For which?
Hockey.
Okay.
Well, so we call him that.
Or I have to pay you off for hockey,
hold
right?
on.
Yeah, pay you off for hockey.
Yes.
Which leads to this question.
And then, did you win the regular season for baseball?
Yes, I did.
So, yeah, I owe both of you beer.
I had the Brewers. Now, here's the question. The hockey, so for those that are unfamiliar, last year we began a game where we took, at the beginning of the season, the teams of the two respective seasons in the National Hockey League and in Major League Baseball, and we looked at teams that were prognosticated to win. Their over-under was like fewer than 50% of the games. And then we each selected which team would win the most out of those teams that were available to select.
Correct.
We never did it this year for the hockey season. The hockey season is already underway.
Well underway, yeah.
Do we right now simply look at the teams that do we just punt on it and say we just didn't do it? Or do we look at the teams right now that cumulatively all have, fewer than so many points and roll with it that way?
I say we punt on it because last year I think we barely paid attention to it.
Well, speak for yourself.
I feel like we were definitely more invested on the baseball side.
Uh-huh.
I would agree with
It
Eddie
is
in that
easier to
regard.
follow in baseball for sure.
Yeah.
Now, hockey side, I told you my buddies and I adopted the Buffalo Sabres.
Yes, sir.
Things were off to a great start. These guys are high flying. They're scoring goals all over the place. I'm following their team on the Expos Twitter, on the account, and they're sending things like the other night, the Buffalo Sabres, and I know a lot of people here care about hockey and the Buffalo Sabres, but the Buffalo Sabres, I got to brag on them a little bit. They were I think it was in Colorado. They scored 4 goals first period, 4-0 lead.
And still lost, right? Is that what you're
I
getting
say
at?
to Shannon, who's a native of Denver, her brother, decent Avalanche fan. I'm like, your boys are getting smoked by Buffalo. McConnell and Byron are sending me texts. We're texting each other back and forth. Go Sabres. Let's go. Awesome logo. Beautiful, beautiful uniforms, sweaters, whatever you want to call them. We all had the hats on. We're sending the pictures. Byron bought a T-shirt. We're all in. We're all in. They lost 5-4.
Brutal.
Last night, taking on the Detroit Red Wings, or maybe it was 2 nights ago.
Saturday.
I get an alert. They scored their 5th goal. And I'm like, these guys offensively are unbelievable. Unbelievable. Problem is they've got like a 5'10", 130-pound guy apparently in net. 6'5" they lost. They've lost 7 straight. So it's been a struggle. We're on the struggle bus. But I'm on the ground floor. I'm no bandwagoner. Like, Eddie, you picked that Seattle Kraken bandwagon.
No.
Yeah, it's bandwagon.
No, it's not.
trendy. You went with the and
It's
here's the
not.
other thing. Here's the other thing where you're going to be hating life in a couple of years.
Okay.
You picked the Kraken because you like the fact they got those like kind of light turquoise color scheme. That was a trendy scheme for like 10 months. It's like in the mid 90s when every team was using teal and purple. People are like, oh, I like the Raptors. Why? Because they got purple and silver uniforms. It was cool for like 10 months. Now they're like, oh, what am I supposed to do? I'm a fan of this team that won a title like 6 years ago. Nobody even remembers it. Same with teal. The Jaguars, when they started, they went with teal. No. The Pistons went teal for a while. Now, Utah would have been cool because but expansion teams, though, it's set up for those teams to have success. We're ground floor, baby. No bandwagon here. I'm not like front runner here to my left. Who's your favorite team? Well, the Chiefs and the Yankees and, maybe the Mets now that they got Juan Soto and they just paid him $1 billion.
Okay. I have a track record of consistency and allegiance to my fandoms decades on end, okay? I will not sit here and be lambasted because I had to sit through Damon Heward and Trent Green and Brody Croyle, and now
Look
it's not
what
my
you've
fault that
done.
Patrick Mahomes is there
He's
now.
back on the spiel, Jake.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Like college football, I'm a Notre Dame fan. Okay. What about basketball? I like Duke. They're cool.
Don't like Duke. Screw Duke.
I mean, they're all right. By the way, you haven't mentioned anything about Juan Soto leaving for.
I mean,
I got a text.
Eddie
when that happened.
Eddie did get a text because Eddie told me he wasn't re-signing in New York. I was very confident about that, even though Eddie was just doing it to be a hater. But
No.
it's a lot of money, man. That's all I'll say.
Here's the thing: 75 million guaranteed. What, 765 million?
Can get up to like 850 million or something.
But the
crazy.
ridiculous thing is this: you mark my words. I guarantee it. Guarantee it. Who's the last player that signed more than a 9 or 10 year contract where during the life of the contract it was like, man, they really got return on investment on that?
Cincinnati did it with Joey Votto.
It's a short list.
And Cincinnati, by the end of it, was like, people were like, what are they going to do with Votto? Right?
Yeah, probably.
I mean,
He's old.
I guarantee you by year 9, there's going to be buyer's remorse. And I know that's 9 years, right? Do the Mets win a World Series with Juan Soto because of Juan Soto?
That's all that matters.
Do they, though?
That was my... I don't think so, no, because the Dodgers still exist. Like, I see them getting sent home multiple times from the monstrosity that LA has become with deferred money as far as the eye can see. And, I don't think they do. And if you don't, then it was a waste of money.
The crazy thing is, how is Juan Soto worth that and Shohei Ohtani did not get that?
Because Scott Boras is insane.
Good for him, right?
Yeah.
Wonder what Scott Boras' net worth is.
Imagine that's a pretty penny, whatever it is.
Scott Boras, like the first big client that I remember Scott Boras having was J.D. Drew, and he refused to sign with Philadelphia, and they threw batteries at him.
You want to take a guess? I've got it in front of me.
The net worth of Scott Boras?
Yes.
$265 million.
I've seen it, so I can't.
Oh, wait, no, it's got to be higher than that because he gets 7%, right? 890 million.
No. Too high
$1.
there. 450 million.
Okay. Not bad.
A lot of money for an agent.
Not bad. I mean, what's he get? 7% probably?
Something
His
like
career
that.
earnings are probably going to exceed 800 million here shortly.
Okay. What about this? Who's higher, Scott Boras or Drew Rosenhaus?
Oh.
Good question. I
I'll
would
say
say Boris because it's baseball.
Yeah.
Confirmed.
Yeah.
Rosenhaus 165.
Not even in the same gated community.
You give me $165 million right now. I got an apartment in like 2 different cities and a house in Wyoming.
All
and
your dogs.
Good news for you guys. Good news for you guys.
What would that be?
You never have to hear from me again.
Hell yes.
That is confirmed. So too is Scott Agnes, who joins us next. Jimmy, you remember you went to England, right?
Yeah, actually,
Obviously, you remember that.
believe it or not, a year ago this week, actually.
Was it really?
I was in the air to London with Haley.
And so when you did that, you went to, which I thought was very cool, you guys sought out the pub where the scenes were filmed in Ted Lasso, right?
Correct, yes.
Now, and I can't recall, was it the actual pub where the Peanut Gallery watches the matches, or was it just a pub that they designed a studio to look after?
So that's a great question. I do believe that all of those shots were filmed on location there. Like, it was the actual pub, and they definitely filmed some scenes in the pub for certain. I don't know. I would say yes, Jake, because a lot of their filming took place on location. Like, I remember reading about them going to the United Kingdom and going to London and filming all of that there as a Premier League team. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Because one of the things, and I love the fact that you did that, because I think it's super cool when you see something and then you just go to you see it in person. You're like, oh, wow. I have always wanted, and I kind of regret the one time very briefly that I was in London that I did not go to the street corner where that video for Come On Eileen was filmed. I don't know why. I've always been fascinated by that little old neighborhood in London from that video. And that would have been the most Query-esque thing to do, to go seek it out in some weird fashion. Everybody's like, what?
But
I thought it was cool you did the pub.
The Prince's Head is the name of the bar. It's right there in Richmond. Real place.
So Richmond is a neighborhood,
real place,
right?
Yeah. I walked through that park area where they filmed some of the scenes on the bench. It was so weird. Jake, I know you relate to this as well as anybody because you like to go and do where things were shot and get old ladies to yell at you because you're on their property and they're not happy about it. But it was a very weird out-of-body experience to walk around there and be like, oh, this is a real place. That's cool.
Because I think most people just assumed it's all fictional, right?
Yeah.
There are a lot of people that were hoping that the Pacers season so far has been fictional at times, including losing at home to Charlotte, a team that's theoretically had their number. Joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line from Fieldhouse Files to talk about the Pacers is Scott Agness. And Scott, Rick Carlisle was on this morning with the guys, was talking about just the significance and the importance of major pieces that they are missing, notably at the center position, and Isaiah Jackson, and as well, James Wiseman, who we didn't know what he had, and we never got a chance to see it, but it really has put a lot on Miles Turner, and they have an open roster spot now, correct? Take me through the decision to open up a roster spot and what you think they may do with it.
Yeah, so there's several factors in play here. First of all, I just don't think it was a great fit with Moses Brown, but at the same time, they needed to get help, right? They needed something because it had been 3+ weeks into the season where both James Wiseman and Isaiah Jackson had been out, and you're asking a lot of this team. And then on top of that, you're starting 4 or 3, and Aaron Nesmith's out, etc. So they brought in Moses Brown as kind of temporary relief. Now I think they're, again, canvassing the league, and the intriguing thing coming up, Jake, is in the next 5 days, then much more of the league becomes trade eligible starting December 15th. That opens up a lot more possibilities. That's why there's no trades right now, for example. And normally those things will start to happen. Kind of the G League showcases a lot of times where those conversations start December 19th, 20th. And the other thing in all this that the Pacers front office has to factor in is the money aspect, because they don't have very much money to operate with without going into the luxury tax, where they would have to pay a premium for each additional dollar they go over. So you're talking about, if they don't send anything out in a trade and just bring a player in, it would be a minimum contract guy. Outside of that, they could really move on from a player or two, potentially bring back a center in return and get greater value. But the other thing I should mention too, Jake, is they did receive the disabled injury exception last week, which does allow for a little bit more salary cap relief. But it's a challenge right now finding any decent center right now that could be on the market and be available, while also not paying a premium and setting the franchise back by going into luxury tax, which is just dumb business sense.
Scott, this offseason was centered around the outlook for Miles Turner moving forward, knowing that you can't extend him until season's end and knowing that it was going to be a contract year for him. I've always advocated that if you ever get even the inkling that a player is not going to re-sign with you and you're a smaller market team, you need to go and see if you can seek out potential trade compensation. I'd say that conversation is basically off the table now because of how shorthanded they are already at center. So when you look at pieces on this roster that match financially. What are we talking about here? If we're simulating guys that they could include in a potential trade package that would make the money make sense.
Yeah, that's a good point that I hadn't even got to, is if you don't plan to, say, bring Miles back after this year when he'll be 29 years old, which typically in the league, centers are not effective at that age. Like what LeBron's doing at age 40 is an anomaly. It's a unique thing. But you can't afford to move on from him right now because of the center spot. And that was something that was going to be a creative angle this upcoming summer when you got to decide, maybe you bring him back on a 2-year deal, what have you. But what the Pacers would look for here, what you're looking for is teams that are having poor years. Right now, this part into the season, I think traditionally when you look back at the NBA standings, a lot of how the league finished is kind of where they're at right about this time. You're 25, 30 games in, so you really have a good idea of your team and where you compete. So a team like New Orleans that's had all kinds of injury issues and maybe willing to make a deal, those type of teams come to mind. Obviously, the Wizards are tanking. The Raptors are in a losing situation. The Jazz and Trailblazers are in a losing situation. It's not like they can afford a DeAndre Ayton, but a guy in that type of a situation is a player that you're looking for. And then more than anything, you're probably think back to where the Pacers were this time last year, Jimmy, right? They had an excess number of centers, and Daniel Tice. They ultimately waived him for nothing, just to move on from him and allow him to go elsewhere. I don't know if there's that guy somewhere else, but that's certainly a type of player the Pacers would be looking to add because you could get him on a veteran minimum.
Scott, I was just, and I will maintain that I was kind of befuddled over the Daniel Tice move because, and I remember at the time I got completely mocked for it. Maybe I should have been, when I said that I thought Tice could be, and I always use the term goon, for lack of a better phrase, I don't know what other word to use, but just an enforcer type player that is there to rebound, to kind of screen and set tone and free people up on the wings. And to me, that was Daniel Tice perfectly. Why do you think they decided to move from that?
I think the biggest thing was they prioritized the younger guys, your Isaiah Jackson and Jalen Smith, and they firmly believe that Jalen or Isaiah was going to be part of that center conversation moving forward. But then things did not pan out for Jalen, obviously. His minutes deteriorated. He didn't have a role. Then he chose to go elsewhere for a bigger contract and more stability. And then Isaiah, obviously, we thought he would have a significant impact this year. But with Daniel, I didn't think they fully gave him enough chance last year, Jake. I didn't. They threw him in there a couple times, and that was about it, and basically said, we know what you can do. We know what you are, but you're a little older. You don't fit this timeline. We got more guys that are 23, 24. We want to go that route.
Scott Agnes is our guest. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. Scott, if you really had to break it down, and I'm asking it this way to show like the level of importance of the three in terms of what they bring to the table or how the team feeds off of them. I'll take Wiseman out of the equation. But if the Pacers had their choice and they could pick the player that they most need to come back healthy and spend the rest of the year without getting hurt, and they could choose between Jackson, Shepard, and Nesmith, they would pick which?
For me, it's Nesmith. It is. The initial reaction you might think, though, is Jackson purely from a depth standpoint and rebounding. This team has been awful rebounding, 29th in the league. The reality is, even more than rebounding, is they're getting beat by those 6'8" forwards that they have for several years. I mean, we go on down the list and count every game, seemingly a new forward has a career high against them. And so that's why I think everything starts with defense. Better defense will lead to better rebounding, which will lead to a more productive, fast-paced offense that they've talked about wanting.
Don't they need to know with Isaiah Jackson? I mean, Jackson's at a contract year too, if I'm not mistaken, right? So
yeah, he's coming off his rookie contract, but it'll be a restricted free agent, so the Pacers can match any deal out there.
But the real challenge and the real pickle that's created, and you tell me if I'm overthinking this, Scott. The Pacers now, if they are going to weigh out what they do with Miles Turner, they're now a little bit handcuffed with that because they kind of don't know what may be there in terms of what they would have in backing in the backup if he were to leave. Right? I mean, this creates a real dilemma for them in the lack of not only the lack of front court play, but the lack of secured and locked in long-term front court play, right?
Yeah, this is unfamiliar, right? How many years have we talked about perhaps them having too many centers?
Right.
And it wasn't too long ago, Jake, probably a year and a half, when they had 6 centers on the roster. By the way, Gogas Patadze started all but 3 games down in Orlando. He'd be nice to have.
He's actually played well, right?
Yeah, he really has. And nothing like incredible numbers, nothing like 20 and 10, but I don't think that's who he is. He's more of a 10 and 8, 10 and 10 guy, and that's what he's delivering. But there was Terry Taylor as well, though he was undersized, but he did some rebounding, and then, of course, the other guys that we referenced earlier. But, no, there is a great dilemma. It's got to be within this Pacers front office coming into this year when Isaiah Jackson and the Pacers did not do a deal. Obviously, they could have negotiated a contract off the rookie scale deal. I think it was probably wise for the Pacers to play this season out, especially after all the money that they committed this offseason. So many guys got paid. And so they wanted to play it out and see, hey, is Isaiah going to become the player we want and believe he can become, or is he still not quite there yet because we want to pay him appropriately? But the challenge, as you referenced, was Miles in a contract year. You can't negotiate till next offseason. And now Isaiah the same way, and he's coming off what most refer to as the worst injury in sports still, is the Achilles tendon tears. It's not the ACLs anymore. And so a guy like him is so springy. He runs the floor well. He finishes so high. You always worry about those things, but he's so young. And so, yeah, that's that new dilemma that they have to be debating about in that front office, I think, every single day right now.
Do you think that currently, Scott, the Pacers' slow start has impacted their chemistry at all?
I think so. Something's off. And I can't put my finger on it, Jake. I can't.
I don't know that they can put their finger on it, right?
Of course, right. It's that old media question, right? Like, what's gone wrong? And then they answer, well, if I knew, we would adjust.
Right.
That's really the crossroads that they're at right now. And I don't think it's necessarily bad chemistry. It's just things aren't clicking, and there's so many different things going against them right now. We hear the physicality and having to adjust to that. Obviously, the influx in lineups. We fully expected Johnny Furphy to spend the majority of the season in the G League. Well, he hadn't even got any of that time because he's been needed to play in the rotation. Quentin Jackson last night, a two-way guy, finally played his first G League game last night. So certainly they're playing guys you didn't expect. They're short on centers. Tyrese has not been even close to his all-star caliber self, and that has played a big role as defenses try to eliminate him, and he's clearly going through some things.
What's going on with Halliburton?
Man, I think it all goes back to just not having a true offseason and always playing from behind is how I would put it, right? Because he had that injury in January, and things have not been perfect since then. It's been one thing after another, 2 or 3 different injuries since then. He lost kind of his safety net and Buddy Hield, which I don't think helped. That's why I think the underrated factor in how we talk about this team being so much different than last year is last year they had more shooters. You had Buddy Hield, who played so well off of him, who opened up the court, who was a better three-point shooter. I think that was an underrated, not talked about enough factor. Obviously, it was not. I don't criticize as much the Pacers because they were doing a favor for Buddy Hield to get him elsewhere because Pacers made it clear we're not paying you in free agency what you're wanting. So he wanted to get a larger role elsewhere going into free agency. So I think that again plays a smaller factor. And then I just don't. I think they're not flying under the radar anymore. And that's another thing here is they're not catching anybody by surprise like they did during the in-season tournament at this time last year. But I don't think it's any one factor. I think it's probably a collection of 6 different things.
Scott Agness is our guest of Fieldhouse Files. He joined us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Scott, where do they need to be at from a treading water standpoint within the Eastern Conference for this to not be a panic-stricken season? Because I'm not quite there yet. I'll be honest, I'm frustrated. I'm disappointed, but I understand losing 2 starters and having the lack of front court depth they would like to have, accompanied with Tyrese Halliburton battling whatever it is he's battling, would hamper even the best of the East. So when you look at the standings and you look at their outlook over the next month or so, where do they need to be at from a treading water standpoint by the time they get Nesmith and Nembhard back at full strength, even though Nemhard's minutes are ramping up right now.
I think it would go a long way, Jimmy, if they could win these 2 games that are, that were added to the schedule coming up because of them not advancing in the in-season tournament with Philadelphia and New Orleans, both teams ravaged by injuries. Because then after that, there is a brutal stretch, which I'm sure you guys have talked about, like a 2-week stretch over Christmas where it's just top team after top team after top team.
Their schedule started favorably.
It totally did. Outside of a road-heavy schedule, it did start heavy on the road. But in terms of level of opponent, it certainly wasn't what it's about to become. So I would think if you could win these next couple of games, you're close to 500, and then if you could avoid like that 3-game losing streak, like win 1 for every 3 or 4 games. Get to January 1st and kind of hit the reset button, hopefully. By then, Shepard should be back. Aaron Nesmith, potentially, depending on how he's coming with that left ankle injury. But I'm mentally, the 500 record's kind of the goal, but I just see that as impossible with the upcoming stretch.
Hey, Scott, a couple of things. Scott Agness, our guest, Express Pro Tire and Auto Gas Line. When looking at just, especially with some of the injuries and not knowing what happens with free agency, et cetera, for some reason, I was thinking in my mind that the Pacers had traded away their first-round pick in the upcoming draft. And then I'm like, wait a minute, maybe I've got that wrong. I think they acquired even a second-round pick. Do you recall where they stand in terms of this off-season's draft coming up?
Yeah, they sent out one from next year. The 2026 pick is outgoing, I believe. They have their first-round pick this upcoming year. And they have a lot of second-round picks incoming. I believe.
They loaded up on second-round picks, right?
Yeah, that's been a big thing that Kevin Pritchard has emphasized in the last 4 or 5 years.
They've
just
actually hit
gathering those assets and seeing what you can do with them.
And they've hit on them, right? Because Furphy, wasn't he a second-round pick?
He was, yeah. And in fact, they moved up one pick to get him. But it's beyond hitting on those guys. It's more using that as tools to get more or move up, those sorts of things.
Okay, other thing. And I don't want to constantly bang this drum of negative Nancy. Mm-hmm. And I know he's really young, and we've been told 100 times how young he is and his potential and et cetera. And I really like him. He seems like a really nice young man, and there are brief moments where you go, okay. But at this point, we can't say that Jarris Walker hasn't had time to show what he can do. Is the sand starting to move through the hourglass?
I think it's fair to call his start to his career a little bit of a disappointment based on the level of expectations, right? Not only a lottery pick,
just
but a
where
guy
he was acquired, right?
Yeah, he was a lottery pick. They did move back one spot, right, to get an additional pick. But he was going to be the 7th pick overall if Washington didn't want to do that deal. So he's a lottery pick right there. And that was, I think, a case, Jake, of drafting need rather than maybe best player available or biggest potential. We all understood it at the time, right? They did not have a four player. And 1 month later, they acquired Obi Toppin. 6 months later, Pascal Siakam was acquired. So that really wiped out his rookie season as well because he didn't have a spot in the rotation. I also empathize with the fact that then everything changed for him in this offseason, right? What did we talk about? Not the 4, not playing there. Let's try you at the 3. And we saw him ball handling more at Summer League, which I don't think was very effective, as he kind of led the team in turnovers. And so I do understand a lot of that. But you are right. He's starting to get more substantial regular minutes. And actually, more than that, they're depending on him for more of those minutes. And I have not seen the defensive effectiveness that I thought was hyped up and emphasized with him coming out. I will say his 3-point shot's what he improved on last year, and I think he has really demonstrated that this year.
Scott, are we ever going to get to a point where you can't just place on the floor on the opposing team's roster, insert average to above average wing here, and he's going to go off for 25 against the Pacers? Like, will we ever get to a point where that's not something that's feared, or is that just a weakness and an Achilles heel for them that's here for the foreseeable future?
It's been here for like the last 4 or 5 years at least. That's been my running joke, Jimmy. 6'8" forward, insert name here, goes off for career high. Without fail, I bet the number is at 8 players this year against him. Wasn't like Scotty Barnes one of the most recent? Brandon Miller had success.
Brandon Miller's been, he's really good though.
Absolutely, but you hope to have a guy that can help minimize the impact of certain players like that. And yeah, Jimmy, that's I think the outside of no, I would say this is number one beyond center because centers you can get. Wings are the most coveted position, and the Pacers have lacked a true lengthy, sizable wing for significant time. I think you got to go back to maybe like a Thad Young, Boyan, obviously a PG before then.
Hey, Scott, you know who the answer is for the Pacers at the center position that I think is available?
I do. Can you remind me his name?
Is he available? You know?
As of, I believe he is. Last time we talked, I mentioned him.
The human rebounding machine and fan favorite Bismack Biyombo. That's the answer right there. Do you realize what will happen if the Pacers?
Yeah, he's a free agent.
Okay,
still.
And by the way, what did I thought Moses Brown? To be honest with you, when he was in, I thought he played okay. For what they needed out of him, why was he not a fit?
I'll say this: I think he didn't get enough opportunity. He did early. Had that big game against Washington, and then I was surprised how much his minutes kind of went away. And then we saw him not play in the last two games. Enrique Freeman, the undersized center, more of a forward, get the minutes this past game. 5 minutes per game over nine games. I thought he would get more than that. It's one of those. Obviously, the trouble is with the backup center, really like an emergency center. There's not going to be any great fit. I don't think his basketball IQ is exactly as high as you would hope. That's why he was kind of more of a stopgap. But he has no shot, like literal shot, outside of like 3 feet.
Right.
He's mostly in there to just rebound and score, and so he plays these limited minutes, just has a rebound or two. I will say in his one interview that he did post-game, he talked about how he's had to learn all kinds of stuff, a lot of the language and how they operate, which is both a challenge for him, but it also requires the Pacers to get him up to speed. Maybe that's taken longer. I also think, look, you have 4 days between games. By waiving him, you don't have to pay him per day. You realize you're probably going to get a better option here coming up, hopefully sooner than later. I don't think there was any harsh reason why it fit. I think there's better options out there eventually that they can find.
You know the biggest thing that Bismack Biyombo brings to the table?
His name being Bismack Biyombo.
His name is Bismack Biyombo. That is correct, yes. And I'm telling you right now, if for some reason there was he's like some random 15-day contract signing, I will go absolutely hog
You'll buy
wild.
the jersey.
Listen, if he plays, can you imagine this, okay? If he plays in the game that's Boomer's birthday and Rocky's also in the building, forget about it. Forget about it. Take me away.
More coveted selfie, you and the Duck or you and Bismack Biyombo?
Oh, Bismack Biyombo.
Okay, all right. Wow.
Bismack Biyombo, for sure.
You didn't even hesitate there.
Yeah, no.
You and the Duck got close.
Well, the Duck was cool, don't get me wrong, but the Duck, first off, the Duck he ain't going anywhere, right? No. Bismack, you don't know how much longer I don't mean he's going to pass away. I'm just saying, you know how much longer he's going to be around the game of the NBA, so you got to get it while you can. Scott, we appreciate it, man. If you get any info on Bismack Biyombo, let me know.
Will do. Thanks, guys.
I'm telling you, isn't this just great to say Bismack Biyombo?
It does.
Can you imagine if he'd have played in the G League for Bismarck? Now, how awesome would that be to be like Bismarck's Bismack Biyombo?
It's a great headline.
Oh, it's the best, right? We were in here's an assignment for you guys. When I was in Milwaukee over the weekend, and we stayed at the Brew House Inn, the Pabst Brewing Hotel. It's awesome. Everything about it's awesome. There was a basketball team staying in our hotel. And several guys had on NBA type sweatsuits. It wasn't anybody playing the Bucks because they were on the road. And I would recognize if they were NBA players. It wasn't anybody playing Marquette because they were playing Wisconsin, so they would and the game was going on when.
Sure.
Is there a G League team that would be playing in or around Milwaukee?
I mean,
it's weird that I'm 52 years old and I was somewhat intrigued by a professional team being in the hotel, which happened to us in Scotland.
The Herd is their G League team, but they're in Oshkosh, so I don't think they would have been there.
They do have a G League team up there?
Mm-hmm. It's in Oshkosh, though. So,
are you sure is there still one there? Because I looked in the G League roster and didn't see a team that I didn't think I saw one in Wisconsin. So they left.
Wisconsin Herd. Yeah, they're in Oshkosh.
Okay, I hadn't heard that.
Nice.
Who is the most notable player on their roster? Is there anybody on the roster you're familiar with?
Nothing that jumps out right now.
Do you know the most famous player basketball-wise from Oshkosh?
Justice Winslow's on there. How about that?
Okay. He was a Duke guy, right?
He was.
NBA champion Terrence Davis is on that.
Hey.
team.
Who coaches him? Sometimes the coaches you'll recognize too.
No.
Isn't Tyrese Halliburton from Oshkosh?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Is that why he wears overalls every once in a while?
Could be.
I'm being serious.
I mean, it's as good a guess as any.
Eddie is staring now at the roster of the
shops at
Oshkosh
Oshkosh
Herd.
Bagosh?
I mean, you'd have to, right?
Yes.
What if we find out that Oshkosh Bagosh is actually made like in Walla Walla, Washington?
Did you figure out the head coach, Jimmy? Did you tell him?
No, I did not.
Bino Udrih.
Excuse me?
Bino Udrih. Former NBA player.
Was he an NBA coach at one point?
He's a former player.
I was thinking he coached in the league at some point as well, but anyway.
He's Slovenian.
Was in the NBA for about 13 seasons.
Really?
Also
Former
played
first-round
overseas as
pick.
well.
Okay.
Taken by the Spurs in 2004.
By the way, the kid that just, the number one player in high school basketball just announced earlier today that he's going to BYU. I thought a really good line from our program director, Jeff Rickard, who said it's not BYU, it's BUY, because, how does the number one player in the country end up at BYU? But he had an interesting thing to say about his declaration for BYU when asked about it. And I thought to myself, this is a sign of the apocalypse. And just stop the planet, I want off. And I'll tell you what he said next. Jimmy's plays of the day, the wildly popular and available to be sponsored plays of the day coming up about 15 minutes from now. A couple of news and notes before we get to the thing I was going to say about the number one player in America. Sad news to learn, although, I mean, you're still hopeful for the best. Ryan Sandberg, one of the most popular players probably of our generation for the Chicago Cubs, announced via Instagram earlier today that his cancer has returned and spread to other organs, forcing intensive treatment. He was diagnosed with prostate cancer in December of 2023, then declared himself cancer-free the following August after months of treatment, but says that it has returned. Unfortunately, we recently learned the cancer has relapsed and it has spread to other organs. Sandberg said, "This means that I'm back to more intensive treatment. We will continue to be positive, strong, and fight to beat this. Thank you for your thoughts and prayers for me and my family," end quote. Sandberg, who appeared at an Indianapolis Indians game a couple years ago, and I did not realize until was doing an interview and promotion for that, and he was very fun and very cool, by the way. He had a daughter has a daughter, and his daughter at one time, and maybe even still does, lives in central Indiana, in Carmel. But certainly hope the best for that. Secondly, in our league, Fantasy Football Aquarium Company League, amazing how it turned out, because you want to talk about fair and balanced, if you will. If you exclude Jimmy's team of suck, everybody else was like incredibly competitive. Playoffs are now set. Eddie, you have advanced as the highest point totaled 7-7 team, correct?
Yes, we were at the bottom with Tire Fire there for a while. I was getting harassed by you weekly for being at the bottom out of the standings.
By who?
You harassed Jimmy and I for being at the bottom there in the I think you called it the well of the Aquarium Company Fantasy Football League. And then we start to get healthy, we get hot, and now look at that, Jake. We are the team nobody wants to play going into.
You just got beat.
I don't care.
Okay.
I'd rather lose that game when it does not matter because I already had the spot clinched.
Wait, so hold on a second. And this is, I wouldn't know, right? Because playoffs have been off the radar for Tire Fire since week 3. But this is my ignorance of not knowing our playoff format. So wait a minute, you didn't make it?
Oh, that's right. He did not make it.
You didn't make the playoffs?
No.
It was only a 4-team.
Yes.
Yes, it's
playoff
only 4
bracket?
teams. Yes.
Yeah. Really?
So
wow.
So my team, Country Roads, Karina, Rick, and Joe were all 7-7. Eddie also 7-7. The thing
Man, I feel bad for Karina because a tough loss to Tire Fire over the weekend might cut them out of the playoffs.
I'll tell you what kills me. What kills me is, I think it was, I'd have to look at the results, the schedule results, and I realized like nobody cares about your fantasy team, right? But there was one week where I was beaten by 0.16 points, and I had like a running back on Monday Night Football that in the fourth quarter had like a 3-yard tackle for loss and lost 3 yards, and it cost me the week. Otherwise, I'd be 8-6 and in. But it's a game of inches.
Man, okay, I can say it now because it doesn't matter. My team's terrible, but now that you're out as well, the Terry McLaurin trade was an awful trade on my part. Absolutely should not have gotten rid of him. I was weighing wide receivers to move on from, and I wind up sending you the 7th best scoring wideout in our league. But hey, it doesn't matter because you're with me.
By me, right?
You're with me in the eliminated section,
That's right.
even though I've been there since week 3.
Well,
only 4 teams.
Okay. I'll tell you another thing that hurt me. I had one of those, and it's my fault.
Yeah.
But I had one of those weeks, I think 2 weeks ago, where I thought I had moved players on bye into the bench, and so that I didn't. And so, what are you going to do? At any rate, the playoffs now for the league itself. Congratulations to the following that have advanced into the playoffs. Bill, who is at 10-4. Broken Colt at 10-4, and then Matthew and Maine at 8-6. Matthew, now formerly from Maine, at 8-6, and then Eddie's Watermelon Gummies at 7-7. So best of luck to all of you.
I think we might have to. Not that it would have mattered for
Show's
Tire
about to get
Fire
interesting,
over here.
boys. Just opened up the package.
But I think we might need to fight for playoff expansion next year.
That's right.
That's tough. You're straight to the conference finals basically with only 4 teams. That's surprising.
I did not tinker with the settings. That's something that can be discussed in the future.
Ooh, I forgot
Those
about
were
that. Yeah.
standard settings.
Now, the number one high school basketball player in America, the number one recruit in America, okay? AJ DeBonsa. I hope I'm saying that name correctly. I will be totally honest with you. Until yesterday, I had never heard of the name of the number one recruit in America. So I probably have that in common with Mike Woodson.
Well, that makes two of us.
He's a 6'9" wing player, the number one prospect in high school basketball. And he made his announcement today on First Take, where he chose between Alabama, North Carolina, Kansas, and basketball power BYU, which is where he is heading. They were so excited on the Brigham Young campus, they cracked open immediately a case of Pepsi Max. Now, there are rumors that his NIL offer with BYU is over, like into the $5 million range or beyond. $7 million, I'd heard. And I get it. I mean, that's cool. I mean, he is, it says, one of the most prolific scorers in the country throughout high school basketball. He is the Gatorade Player of the Year for Massachusetts. Played in Nike. You know, these days guys are playing all over the place, right? In all kinds of different tournaments and everything else. But I heard him interviewed on the radio program immediately preceding ours on Greeny's show, and Jason Williams was interviewing him. Jay Williams. Well, Jason Williams when he was at Duke. And as Jay Williams was interviewing him, he was saying, well, you know, I mean, I'm really looking forward to playing, but like, the NBA is going to be different because, you know, in college, the fun thing is like it's not a job. And Jay Williams was like, well, no, man, but it is. I mean, and he's like, well, but it's not, you know, life's about like more than basketball. And you don't have a contract. And Jay Williams was like, well, I get that, but my career ended because of a motorcycle accident. So, you know, you have to always be conscientious. He's a young kid, I realize that. But he then later went on to declare the NBA franchises that he would prefer to play for. I'm like, so that's where we are now? I mean, it's one thing. Maybe he was just simply asked, hey, who are your favorite teams? But apparently he went on to say, and by the way, I prefer to play for Orlando or San Antonio next year. Okay. I mean.
Yeah, I would need context framed in that, because it's one thing if you're asked who your favorite teams are, or even in today's sports culture, it's not uncommon for someone to ask a player, hey, who would you like to play for if you had your choice of it? But if you're actually listing demands a la Eli Manning, then you're, you know, walking in a slippery slope.
Now, Catchings, that was originally committed to Purdue, and he ended up at BYU, is there. Now, and I haven't looked. I think he's averaging – he's had an okay start, right, Kanan Catchings?
I will be fully honest with you, Jake. The amount of BYU basketball that I have consumed at this stage is
totally understandable.
Minimal.
I mean, Jimmer Fredette. And then you had Danny Ainge's miracle shot in the NCAA tournament. And that's kind of and Sean Bradley. There's your history of BYU basketball, right?
Pretty much. But apparently now a mainstay of cash cows able to woo top talent to be a part of BYU hoops.
Didn't BYU have a highly seeded team in recent history that lost one of their best players just before the tournament for breaking rules at BYU?
That sounds right.
I want to say like 2017, somewhere in there. But I was going to look and see what Kanan Catchings is averaging right now. I can look that up while do you have plays of the day for us, Jimmy?
I do have a couple.
All right, we'll do that next, and I'll look up that information as well.
Plenty of action for today's plays of the day, but first, let's take a trip across the pond, shall we? Match day 6 of 8 in the UEFA Champions League.
The
Just
what
two
league?
plays for you. The UEFA Champions League, the top championship league within soccer over there, and you could argue in the world, but especially over in Europe as we continue on with match day 6. We'll lay 1.5.
Did you say Europe?
Favorite, I did say Europe, but we'll lay 1.5 there for PSG. They take on Salzburg. That kicking off at about 3 o'clock. We'll also go tie no bet. That means if this winds up as a draw, your bet would be refunded on Real Madrid as they take on Atalanta. Back in the States, college basketball tonight, I'll take Michigan to win on the money line on a neutral site floor in New York against Arkansas. NBA Cup quarterfinal tonight, scoop the 7. Orlando Magic getting 7 points tonight against the Milwaukee Bucks. Eddie, any plays for you?
I will lay the 7 with Milwaukee.
Ooh, okay.
I think you are underestimating how porous that offense will be for Orlando. No Paulo Banchero, no Franz Wagner. Wagner just, ironically or coincidentally, like Banchero, tore his, I just had it in my brain, then I lost it.
It's oblique, isn't it?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Jake.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're welcome, I should say, yes.
Anything else just to lay the 7?
Yeah.
That's it?
Yeah.
All right, those are your plays of the day.
Okay, Cannon Catchings, by the way, averaging 10.7 points per game through 8 games with BYU, and it was in 2011 when their power forward, the Cougars were 27-2 with that Jimmer Fredette team in 2011, and Brandon Davies, their power forward, was suspended just prior to the NCAA tournament for violating BYU's honor code. And the rumor was at the time it was premarital relations with his girlfriend. I have no idea if that's actually, but that's what Wikipedia says, and Wikipedia typically is all-knowing.
Yeah, indeed.
He went on to an NBA career, and then we'll use your world athletics expertise. I'm going to tell you the team, a couple of teams he played, and you tell me if you can guess which league that is or what country it's in. You ready?
Sure.
Ilan Chalon.
France.
Eddie, do you have a guess?
Saskatchewan. I don't know.
That's actually not bad. France is correct. After that, he played with Palasinestro Veris.
Turkey.
Nope. Eddie?
Greece.
Italy.
Same thing.
After that,
The first one I knew by your cadence. By the
he
way.
played with AS Monaco.
Oh, that one's Italy, yeah.
It's actually Monaco.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay, how about this one? BC Zalgiris.
I'll go with one of Eddie's guesses. I'll say Greece.
Okay. Eddie?
Portugal.
Barcelona. Then he had a couple of obvious ones. He rounded out his career in the EuroLeague with KK Partizan.
Israel.
Serbia.
Hmm.
I do wonder, some of those leagues, I mean, and I understand it. I mean, guys play for a long time overseas in those leagues, and I think some of them, they're really good basketball. Some of them, you see, like when the NBA draft rolls around, and we had that mid, kind of the 03, 05 drafts where it was like everybody was drafting, Euros left and right. Nikolaj Skidavili and Darko Milicic.
Right.
And they produce these like Abe Zapruder films that look like they're shot at Tabernacle and they're playing with Voight volleyballs instead of basketballs. And you wonder how good those leagues are. But I think some of these leagues, especially if you are one of the top American players playing over there, you can make, $800,000, $1 million, tax-free. And it'd be pretty cool, wouldn't it?
Some of the leagues are tough, though. I remember Robbie Hummel shared a story of playing, I believe, over in Russia. And, I can't remember if that's where it was or not, but there's a luxury about certain leagues where you would think basic things like ice packs and stuff is not stuff the trainers would do. Like, he would have to go get his own ice and, take care of his physical therapy treatment himself. You have to really, really love the sport you're playing to make certain compromises playing overseas.
And
there are certain leagues where they'll take care of you, and Jake, you're right, the money's nice, but you really have to love the game.
I mean, I think that the aspect of just being able to see different areas of the world would be intriguing.
Yeah.
But, who was it? Who was the player from Indiana? Maurice Creek?
Sure.
Remember, he was playing in, like, Ukraine? And it was, like, difficult to get him out from a safety standpoint when everything happened over there. I mean, you have to worry about or think about also just in some of the countries. I mean, not all of them. It's a terrible. It's interesting. Some of the former Yugoslavian countries, you still think of as being like these second or third world nations, and then you look at it. I mean, they're absolutely beautiful. Croatia's one of them. Montenegro, Serbia, like there are absolutely gorgeous parts of those countries. I just think it'd be awesome to play in them, and it'd be a ton of fun. But Matt Painter on with JMV coming up later today, correct, Eddie?
Yes, sir.
Again,
Yes.
Indiana getting the win last night against Minnesota. Jimmy, you said you did or did not watch extensively of that game.
Did watch a little bit of it. One thing I wanted to highlight in regards to both the Painter conversation and just weird statistical anomalies. The Week 6 AP poll came out earlier a couple days ago.
Oh, yes. Very important.
And
Very important poll.
apparently, yes, it is a very important poll because every national champion since 2004 has been ranked inside the top 12 of the Week 6 poll. Purdue is a part of that makeup,
Really?
for what it's worth. But yes, apparently every national champion has been inside the top 12 of the Week 6 AP poll since 2004.
Every champion since 04?
Yes.
What year did Syracuse win it? 03?
Yes.
Okay.
So, fun little factoid, but of in-state schools, Purdue
Wait a
fits
minute,
that
is Connecticut ranked?
bill. UConn is they're not in that. It had to be top 12. They're not in the top 12 of it. They were 25th last I saw. I don't know
Well,
if
but you
they're
said,
still.
hold on. So give me that stat again.
You have to be inside top 12 or better AP ranking Week 6 poll.
Okay.
Those 12, the makeup of that top 12 has been the national champion.
I thought you meant this week's poll, every team that is ranked, every team that has won since 2004 is currently ranked in the top
that's
12.
fair. No, let me reemphasize.
I see what you're saying now.
Every year since 2004, the national champion in college basketball has been ranked inside the top 12 of the Week 6 AP poll.
Okay.
So you
in
go
other
back and
words,
look at the 06
so there
champion.
were not
they
any
were
Johnny-come-latelys that
Correct.
got red hot in
Correct.
February.
Yes.
Indiana in 81 that all of a sudden just
Yes.
pours it on. Okay, I get what you're saying.
So that
now.
would be Tennessee, Auburn, Iowa State, Duke, Kentucky, Marquette, Alabama, Gonzaga, Florida, Kansas,
Hey.
Purdue, or Oregon.
I'll tell you something. I watched Marquette Saturday night. Now, we saw
They're a
Marquette.
really fun team.
We saw like what they did in terms of their defense, right?
Yeah.
They were playing Wisconsin in Milwaukee Saturday night Saturday afternoon. But it gets dark in Milwaukee at like 2:30 in the afternoon, so it feels like Saturday night. But we sat in the best place bar in the Pabst Brewery and watched some of that game. And Marquette they are just uber athletic. That's a team that could win it all.
For sure.
They're absolutely a team that can win.
They're great on both sides of the floor. Shaka's got them really cooking there. Yeah,
Totally.
They're a good team.
And then we ended up at this restaurant, and the game was over, and then it was all the like college kids from Wisconsin and Marquette. And it's funny because you had all these kids in there, and I told Shannon, I go, this is basically, you tell me if you agree, but Marquette playing Wisconsin in a game is probably like Indiana playing Butler, right?
Yeah, I would say, yes.
The vast majority of kids, not the vast, but a lot of kids that go to Butler are probably grew up IU fans.
Sure.
If they're from Indiana.
Sure.
And a lot of kids that go to Marquette probably grew up Wisconsin fans, but now they're big.
Yeah, and in terms of enrollment size
every
and everything,
third
that
kid
fits.
had on a Dwayne Wade jersey.
That tracks.
Every kid had on a Dwayne Wade jersey, right? I like when who was it? Was it Bill Raftery when the kid had a triple-double, and he said, by the way, are you familiar with Dwayne Wade? And the guy said, yeah, no, I know who he is. I play at Marquette. I'm relatively familiar with who that is, right? So, big plans for the evening tonight. Obviously, Jimmy, for you, it's to make sure that the car charger's working so that you don't put yourself in a position like you had yesterday with Eddie, right?
I don't want to be having to push the car around Illinois to try to get into the parking garage. So
You guys didn't bring me back anything from Buc-ee's?
It was,
or are you waiting for Christmas?
It was. Well, we can't give away too much in that regard, but it was a last-minute trip. We were so focused on getting there in one piece.
John has walked in He's got on his Enjoy Sprite shirt. Which
Enjoy
is cool.
Sprite. Did you like Sprite when it was like this?
Yeah, I did. Glass bottle days, right?
Glass bottle, styrofoam.
Yeah. Those were
Glass
the days,
bottles.
man.
Yeah. So we had a little Sprite. You know, it was always funny. So at high school, back when I was in elementary and junior high at Eastern High School, you could, if you were 16 years of age or older, with a permission slip, you could smoke at school.
Oh, yeah.
And
a lot of schools had that. It's
they would
crazy,
all
right?
smoke out in front of the Coke machine. The irony here was the Coke machine was locked up because they didn't want anybody drinking Coke before 3 o'clock.
Yeah, because it was unhealthy.
But everybody was sitting there smoking cigarettes.
You know, it's funny. Like, if you go through high schools now, they have vending areas where they've got, like,
Yeah.
big Fruitopia machines and everything else. And I'm like, we couldn't have any of that,
Nothing.
right?
Zero. They had it in the teacher's lounge. They had one of those things where you lift it up and you slid the bottles down and then pulled it out. They had that, and then they had the old school Coke
Well,
machine.
how many people did you graduate with from high school?
No. Well, how many people were actually there or graduated? That's a different thing. Yeah, probably 89, maybe.
In your graduating class?
Probably.
Okay.
Around 90.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Jimmy,
how about
year-
you?
1184.
Like 250, I think.
250? Oh yeah.
Actually, by the time we graduated, I think we were just under 1,000, but we started at 1184. My class
Yep.
ranked 482.
we were very unique because we all could hang out together, right? There wasn't really any. Our class didn't really have everybody. May not do the same things. Maybe he didn't play basketball. You know, maybe she was doing this, but we all hung out together. So that was always pretty cool.
Eddie's doing jump ropes over here.
I know
meaning
he
it's
is.
time
I
to
see him
wrap.
over there.
Matt Painter on today?
Matt Painter's on today. Brandon Stokely is on today.
Nice.
So
Okay.
yeah, all good.
All right, so John's got those two up next. We will be back with you at noon tomorrow. Thank you for listening to Aquarian Company.